Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was trained by Gojo Satoru and awakened 6 eyes? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Leaf That Wouldn't Touch. By the time the blindfolded man flicked a chopstick at Naruto's face, the evening had already gone orange and soft. Ichiraku's paper lanterns washed the counter in gentle red, catching ramen steam and turning it to light. Naruto was mid-slurp, bowl tipped, when wood whispered through the air. It should have tapped his nose. Instead, it slowed, no breeze, no hand, like the world caught its breath. The chopstick hung there a finger's width away, trembling, then slid sideways and thumped to the counter. Ever wonder, the stranger asked, chin propped on his palm, why everything stops just short of you? Naruto swallowed, set the bowl down, and stared at the man's blindfold. Old man Chuki, he said slowly, is this a prank? Because that was kinda cool. And also, very rude. Chuki laughed. Ayame waved him off from the kitchen. Not me, kid. The stranger smiled without showing teeth. Tall, pale, lazy posture like he'd won a game no one else saw. His hair was a white mess that somehow looked deliberate. He plucked up the fallen chopstick, spun it, and balanced it on one finger. It's rude if I'm wrong. It's considerate if your life depends on it. You flicked a stick at my face. Which did not hit you. Curious? No. Come walk with me. You paying for my ramen. The stranger sighed like it hurt. Obviously. Naruto hopped off the stool, slurped the last noodles, and followed the blindfold out into Konoha's dusk. The streets smelled like grilled squid and wet stone. They turned past a laundry line full of shirts, past a cat poised like a rumor on a wall. When they reached a quiet training field, the man stopped. The cicadas took over the talking. Name's Gojo, he said. I pass through places where the world squeezes itself into interesting shapes. You, little fox, are an interesting shape. Naruto faced him, hands in his pockets. Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. And if you know me by the nickname, you can say it out loud and I promise I won't punch you unless you're being a jerk. He grinned. You're a jerk, aren't you? Professionally, Gojo said. He pointed. Throw a kunai. Naruto blinked. At me. Please try to hit my heart, for motivation. Are all tall weirdos like this where you're from? Tragically, I'm the standard model. Naruto flipped a kunai from his pouch. He didn't announce his throw, didn't show off a spin, he simply moved. It was a clean line. A decision turned into metal. Halfway there, the kunai slowed. Air thickened. The knife's ring fell a pitch lower, like sound itself forgot how to vibrate. Naruto felt something, not pressure, not pushback, just the discovery of a boundary. The kunai stopped a handspan from Gojo's chest and hung as if pinned to an invisible page. Naruto stared. A grin caught his mouth, then faltered. This is a trick. Everything is. Until you learn it. Gojo flicked his finger. The kunai floated sideways, settled into Naruto's palm like a well-trained dog. Let's take a walk where the steps are shorter than they should be. He didn't mean a walk. He meant a sprint through something that made hours into a single tilted afternoon. They left Konoha's walls and the evening seemed to stretch. The sky stayed the same bruise of color while the world changed beneath it. Gojo taught by movement. Catch, he'd say, tossing a pebble that would refuse to complete its arc. Let it come. Don't push the world away. Invite it close and tell it to stop. There's a difference. Naruto didn't understand at first. He understood how to throw fists, how to ram his will into an obstacle until the obstacle regretted waking up that morning. Gojo didn't move like that. He kept his hands in his pockets while trees leaned to avoid him. They came to a stream. Water slid over stones like silk, light fractured into coins. Gojo tossed a dry leaf and it skated, slowed, stopped, then drifted around a point in the air that wasn't there. Imagine distance isn't one thing, Gojo said. Imagine every step is made up of smaller steps. You can trip the world if you catch it between them. That's the worst explanation I've ever heard. Perfect, he said brightly. Now breathe. They stood, and Naruto breathed, and something in him clicked like a door latching. He felt. No, He saw, but it wasn't eyes. The stream resolved into threads. Chakra was a color he didn't know a word for, it showed him the places where green shaded into something like sound. The world sharpened too hard, then eased back into his skin. He flinched. What was that? You opened your eyes, Gojo said, smug and gentle at once. Nar. Yuto pressed his palms together to hide their tremble. Breath in, breath out. He looked again, and there it was. The lattice. Every motion had intent inside it, a little arrow, a little notation. He Su. LD tell which branch would fall first when the wind grew bored. And under all of it, his own center. A place where leaves slowed as they came near, where dust paused, where a gnat veered away as if embarrassed to intrude. Everyone always wants to be untouchable, Gojo said. But the trick isn't a wall. It's traffic control. Choose what reaches you. Choose when. He tossed a pebble at Naruto's forehead. Naruto flinched out of habit. Then forced himself still. The pebble came, slowed, stopped, hovered. It was simple. It was impossible. He laughed, the sound sharp and boyish. They did not name it. Gojo gave everything nicknames that sounded like jokes, and Naruto didn't ask for the real words yet. He named the feeling to himself in secret, the place where everything chose to halt. Gojo made the exercises worse. He tied bells to Naruto's wrists and spun him until the world smudged, then threw more pebbles. He walked along the stream and made Naruto keep 3 leaves hovering at different distances while standing on one foot. He caught a sparrow in a loose sleeve and held it above a ravine. Now, Gojo said. What? Hey. Naruto's teeth snapped. His chest hurt. Drop it and all. I am going to drop it. If you only ever wear your shield-like armor, you won't protect anyone else. He released the bird. Naruto didn't think. He reached. Not with hands, not with chakra the way Iruka had taught him. But with the clean sense of what was near and how it wanted to move. The sparrow fell, slowed, trembled, the air thickened into kindness. Naruto could feel the distance between feet. Her and earth split into 100 smaller distances. He let the bird touch the next step down and the next, each one gentle as breath. When it reached his hands, it flapped twice and sat there on his fingers, baffled. Okay. Gojo said softly, now you're dangerous. They trained until the sky finally admitted it had to get dark. Naruto built a little fire and Gojo didn't help. He lay on his back and let ash drift down and watched the little specks hold still a hair before landing on his sleeve. Naruto used the trick without thinking to keep sparks off the grass. You can't be me, Gojo said into the smoke. As if that were a compliment. Thank the gods. But you can be you with better taste. As that, what taste is? Not setting everything on fire to prove you're warm. Naruto smiled. Heat and noodles and stupid birds. This feels like cheating. Cheating, Gojo said, is what people with small imaginations call good math. He rolled to his feet, dusted off. Time's weird where I practice. You have to go home now. Walk back and don't tell anyone what you see, not yet. People will try to write their fear on it. Naruto sharpened into stillness. And you, I show up, Gojo said. When the plot requires a devastatingly handsome mentor. He tapped the blindfold. And when you start using this to keep people at arm's length instead of bringing them close. He took a step, and the knight leaned to let him pass. See you soon, Naruto. Naruto walked back to Konoha with embers tucked behind his ribs. Kakashi hardly glanced up from his book when Naruto arrived at dawn. Sasuke flicked his eyes once, paused a fraction too long, then looked away. Sakura smiled, then made a face when Naruto didn't spill into his usual noise. Chizuna the bridge builder smelled like sake and wet wood. He squinted at Naruto's orange jacket and snorted. Brat looks like a target. Naruto didn't bristle. Good. Stand next to me. If anyone shoots, they'll have to be better than me to get through. Kakashi's eye creased with amusement. We're escorting a bridge builder, not daring the countryside to take a shot. Same difference, Naruto said. He's under my umbrella. Sasuke's mouth tilted. Since when do you carry an umbrella? Quote. Naruto tapped his forehead. Since yesterday. Sakura rolled her eyes. Don't start with the cryptic. The road to the land of waves cut through scruffy fields, then ducked into stands of wet green. Water bugs stitched the surface of puddles. When the demon brothers burst from a ditch with chain and claw, Kakashi moved, then stopped, because the chain didn't wrap Tazuna like it should have. It slowed as if doused in honey. Lynx shuddered to a crawl an inch from the old man's ribs. That inch might as well have been a canyon. Naruto stepped between chain and client, not a flourish. Just a placement. No. Sasuke's shuriken hissed. Sakura hauled Tazuna backward by his collar, and Kakashi dismantled two men with nonchalant precision. When the chain finally clattered, Naruto let it hit the ground, pushed it aside with his foot, and didn't look triumphant. He looked like he'd done exactly as much as the situation required and no more. Kakashi's book dropped a centimeter. Naruto, there's a conversation we're going to have when we're not on a road with ditches. Sure. Naruto tugged at the hem of his jacket, making sure it lay right. You can nag me later. The boatman at the swamp's edge didn't want to cross. Naruto didn't argue. He counted the space between the boat's rail and the world, found the places that caught, and made a path the water seemed to thicken around. The craft barely rocked. Tazuna clutched the gunwale anyway, eyes the size of coins. Mist gathered. It wasn't normal, and the normal of it, white breath on a wet morning, made the wrongness worse. Sasuke sharpened, Sharingan hunger under his skin. Naruto could feel the mist-like fabric against his face. Each droplet had a tendency. Each tendency could be coaxed. Stay close, Kakashi said. His voice changed when he meant it. Lazy turned to lead. Zabuza Momochi, of the hidden mist. He likes fog. He's fond of oversized swords and discourtesy. Oh, good, Naruto said. Two things we have in common. A laugh drifted from nowhere, from everywhere. 3, a voice said. I'm fond of making Konoha Jonin work for their pay. The fog thickened. Naruto let his breath even out. He didn't push back the mist with chakra. He made choices, hundreds of little ones, about how close the world could approach. He wrapped those choices around Tazuna like a second skin. He left his own skin with gaps. Sasuke glanced at him, noticed, didn't comment. A sword bigger than reason whispered through the fog. Kakashi met it midair. Metal in metal, wave hiss. The battle bellin', G'd to men who'd been fighting since they learned to eat. Naruto watched the trajectories open like petals. He saw where blood might go if no one intervened. The mist blurred edges, but not to his sight. With the new sight, the fog was busier, filled with fine lines, quivering angles. The enemy's chakra glowed like a match under wet cloth. Naruto picked a thread and pulled. He moved his hand, palm open. The air listened. A slight tug, a pretended gravity. The fog on their left thinned as if someone ran a dry cloth through it. For one heartbeat, the lines of the bridge, the tooth of Zabuza's sword. Kakashi's habitually slouched shoulders, all were exposed in a bare sketch of reality. Sasuke didn't waste it. He moved like a knife thrown by a better knife, filling the corridor Naruto created. His kunai kissed a water clone, which burst into a splash that behaved incorrectly, hesitating before it fell, as if unsure it was allowed. Zabuza chuckled. Not bad, boy. I'm not a boy, Naruto said, and it came out quiet. You picked the wrong morning to be predictable. Zabuza's presence slid. He traded places with silence and came up behind them. Kakashi met him there, because of course he did. Steel shrieked through the fog. Naruto felt the line of an approach. Kunai from the left, thrown low, the angle a human target knocked Tazuna height, and let it stop midair. The knife hung in front of Tazuna's thigh, point trembling in a little invisible pocket. Tazuna saw it and swallowed a curse. He could have reached out and plucked it. He didn't, because he had sense. Sakura kept her head. She EPT Tazuna low and moved him when Naruto moved, trusting his feet the way you trust stairs. A second presence scratched the air. Finer. Faster. Haku moved like a glass needle. Naruto didn't see him. He saw the intent behind him, a tautness. The precise silence of a body that refused to sound like a body. Ice formed around Sasuke in a sudden rush of perfect planes, mirrors, curved and bright as goosebumps. Move, Sakura cried. Naruto was already moving. He skidded across wet boards, put himself between ice and old man. Needles fanned. He didn't try to block all of them. He pulled the space in front of the critical few and let the rest slip past the margins of his body, shaving breath, cutting cloth not skin. A voice came from the mirrors, gentle and too calm. Step away. I'll kill you if you force me. Naruto's answer was steady. If you could kill me, you would have. You don't want to. A pause. Haku's face appeared in one panel, perfect and smooth and wrong with kindness that wanted to be a weapon. You're strong. My team is strong, Naruto corrected, and his mouth twitched at the corner, because the words felt true, and that was new. He flicked 2 fingers. A needle skittered sideways and embedded in a post. You don't have to be a tool for the worst man in the room. Zabuza barked a laugh. And which one of us is that? The one with the empty eyes, Naruto said. He didn't look at Haku when he said it. For a moment, brief, unguarded, the fog tasted like surprise. Kakashi and Zabuza clashed again, heavy and real. Naruto chose his ground. He made a thin region of air around the civilians, Sakura, Tazuna, and left a hole in his own shape. He let Haku see it. He let Haku aim for it. A needle came, true as prayer. Naruto reached with a tug you could confuse for wind, and the needle curved a degree to the left. It stitched into his sleeve instead of his arm. You'll bleed if I choose to, Haku said. Then choose to be something else, Naruto said. I'll give you the time. He didn't say he was buying it with bruises. He didn't say his ribs ached where the world had tried to remember how to hit him and almost succeeded. He just kept talking, because he could feel something wobble inside the ice. Fear or hope, he couldn't tell which, and it didn't matter yet. Sasuke made the mirrors sweat. He moved with itchy impatience, proud and correct. Kakashi, bored voice, shouted something about teamwork. Naruto didn't shout. He shifted the corridors of fog, opened a clean line between Sasuke and the river, and Sasuke took it because Sasuke was a genius and didn't owe the world explanations for good decisions. Haku hesitated. Needles slowed. Naruto caught 3 and let 2 kiss his jacket and 1 bite just enough to sting. Pain made the math crisper. Zabuza, Haku said, and Naruto could feel the plea, give me an order that spares them. Gojo chose that moment to show his teeth. Men spilled onto the bridge as if poured from a bad bet. Swords, clubs, the kind of armo. That meant you had spent all your money on bravado. The fog, thinner now, showed faces, and those faces looked like men who'd convinced themselves pay excused anything. Zabuza's gaze flicked. He calculated, like a killer. Kakashi's guard didn't drop. Sasuke's stance said he was ready to die twice as long as it took to make it embarrassing for the other side. Sakura's hand tightened on Tazuna's sleeve. Naruto stepped forward and the mob noticed him as an obstacle, then something in their eyes slid sideways because the air in front of the boy didn't look like air. It looked like heat or glass. It looked like a place where your hand would never arrive. Go home, Naruto said. His voice wasn't loud, it was clear. A man with a scar on his jaw barked a laugh and charged. Naruto didn't move. E-man's club stopped an inch from Naruto's cheek. The man's face performed a slow, awkward contortion of confusion, then fear, then something older, the animal recognition that some lines in the world are not for crossing. Naruto's eyes were very blue. They looked like they were listening to a song you couldn't hear. He slid his attention sideways. The club drifted, like a boat caught by current, and struck the attacker's own shin. The man yelped and hopped and swore, and his friends took a half step back without meaning to. Go home, Naruto repeated. He lifted his hand and tugged, and the fog thinned again. And the men saw more than him. They saw the bridge workers huddled behind a stack of lumber, saw Tazuna's hunched back, saw each other. You're not getting paid enough to find out what happens if you try harder. Zabuza watched him over the sword's broad back, something amused loosening the set of his shoulders. Haku watched him from a mirror that caught no one but Naruto. Kakashi's eye slid to him and held. Gojo yelled something obscene about killing everyone anyway. It didn't land right on the men. Naruto could feel the collective nerve quiver. Zabuza, Naruto said without looking away from the mob. You want to leave with your pride. I want these people alive. We both get what we want if you ignore Gojo for 5 minutes. Zabuza tilted his head. You're asking me to betray a client. I'm asking you to charge double, Naruto said, and a grin bit through his calm. Collect in advance. Haku's breath fogged a mirror. Zabuza's non-expression shifted. The big sword turned toward Gojo with a slow rapture that looked like relief wearing violence as a coat. Gojo backpedaled. He had hired wolves and treated them like dogs. Zabuza didn't cut him in half. He cut apart the man's certainty. A slash that removed a piece of a coat, a step that took a chunk from a fancy shoe. Gojo tripped. A little sound spilled out of him that sounded like something you hear in kitchens when a rat realizes the floor is a trap. Leave, Zabuza said to the mob. He didn't shout, but he didn't have to. Jobs come and go. Pride's expensive to fix. They went. Not all at once, but the first 3 turned. And then the rest did the math. Gojo ran the other way and discovered Kakashi had, without drama, placed himself there with the full weight of a Jonin's day job in his stance. Gojo decided to live to hate another morning. He fled. Zabuza watched him go with a connoisseur's sigh, then rested the big sword on his shoulder. Fog thinned to a proper weather again, and the mirrors slid back into water. Haku stepped out of them like a blade sliding into a sheath. Haku's face was the politest kind of apology. You didn't kill me, he said to Naruto. I don't kill people who haven't decided to die yet, Naruto said. And sometimes not even then. You think you can choose for others. I think I can buy time, Naruto said, and he gestured at the bridge. Which looks like it needs all of it. Zabuza looked at Naruto like someone revisiting an impossible math problem and finding it beautiful. You moved your, whatever that is, around the old man first. Left your own skin for me to test. Naruto shrugged. He needed it more. A pause that felt like approval, stiffer because it came from a man shaped like a knife. Zabuza nodded once to Kakashi, once to Naruto, and once to Haku. We're leaving, he said. To Naruto. If anyone else tries to hire me to kill you, I will charge triple. Bring a better sword, Naruto said. Haku's mouth almost smiled. Next time, he said, I'd like to talk without mirrors. I'd like that, Naruto said, and meant it. They faded into the last of the fog the way problems do when you've chosen the right priority. The bridge breathed again. Workers unfroze. Chizuna started talking very fast and very loud about debt and bravery and soup. Kakashi closed his book, a miracle in itself. He looked at Naruto for a long moment with the open, uneasy affect. Chion of a teacher who understands he is no longer alone in knowing things. Conversation, Kakashi said. Later, Naruto said, soft. Please. Kakashi nodded. Sasuke snorted, which, coming from him, counted as 6 words of reluctant agreement. Sakura checked Naruto's sleeve where the needle had nicked him and smacked his shoulder when he flinched. You're ridiculous, she said. Critically acclaimed, he said. They made camp by the bridge in a clearing that wanted to be a meadow. Chizuna snored like someone paid him by the decibel. Kakashi went to pretend he wasn't keeping watch. Sasuke lay on his back and watched leaves like they owed him money. Sakura braided a rope out of straw and unbraided it and braided it again because her hands needed to do something. Naruto sat on a log and let his breathing slow until the world's edges softened. The air near his skin was busy, always busy now. Motes hesitated, then consented to pass. He kept that radius small because Gojo had said something abo. Oot taste and because he liked feeling the night touch him. Footsteps, light, careful. He felt them before he heard them, like little dents in the air. Hinata stepped into the clearing as though she were apologizing to the grass for existing. Hey, Naruto said, surprised warmth snapping his mouth into a smile he didn't fight. What are you doing this side of the world? She bowed, then straightened, looking at the log like she might ask permission to sit and then decided to earn it instead. Teammate is ferrying medicine to the outer villages, she said, voice soft, not shy so much as precise. We heard rumors. I thought. I wanted to see if the rumors are very loud or very true. Both, probably. He patted the log. Sit. She sat, hands placed carefully, eyes flicking once to his sleeve where the cloth puckered from the needle. With the Byakugan, her gaze could slide through the skin, but she didn't take advantage. She looked at his face. You moved the defense around Chizuna, she said. The word came out awkward. She didn't know the name either. Good. He liked it more unnamed. You let yourself. He needed it more, Naruto said again, because sometimes a simple sentence was a bridge. Hinata's mouth softened. I know. A heartbeat. I saw. He blinked. You were watching. My team was nearby. She glanced toward the mist. We stayed out of sight. Kurenai-sensei taught us not to crowd a fight we didn't prepare for. Her humor touched her voice like a feather. Akamaru was very upset. Tell him I said sorry about the smells. I will, Hinata said, and her laugh was quick and quiet. Gone as soon as it arrived. The silence after wasn't heavy. He felt it settle around them like something that fit. Hinata, he said, and stopped, because he'd meant to make a joke. And realized the thing inside his chest didn't want one. Thanks for checking. She nodded. You feel different, steadier. She tilted her head, eyes thoughtful, as if her sight gave her the pattern of a thing and she was checking it against the truth. But not harder. Working on taste, he said, and she smiled in a way that made the joke land twice as well. Kiba's voice drifted from the trees. Basic and loud in the way of boys who liked obvious exits. Hinata, you good. I'm good, she called back, calm. Then softer, to Naruto, be careful how you choose to be untouchable. He looked at her, surprised by how much he wanted to hear that from her, specifically. I will. She stood. We're camped by the bend in the river. If you need help tomorrow, shout twice. I will. She hesitated, then touched his sleeve, the unruly fabric where the needle had misbehaved. The touch was light, almost theoretical. Good night, she said, and left the clearing without making any grass resent her. Naruto watched the space she'd been occupy itself again and felt absurdly grateful for the way some people fit into the world without making it smaller. The bridge opened in the morning like a held breath finally let go. Workers laughed with the brittle sound people make after nearly dying. Hammers argued with nails. Tazuna yelled at a nephew without malice. The fog, properly behaved now, rolled off the water and went to bother some other coastline. Kakashi gathered them. We'll stay until the last anchors are set, he said. People get brave when the finishing line's visible. Then we head home. He glanced at Naruto. After the conversation, Naruto made a face like a kid caught with candy. You're going to make me write a report. I am, Kakashi said, for the first time in my life, looking forward to paperwork. They walked the length of the bridge. Naruto could feel the place laying itself down into the world, a decision in steel. He kept the air tight around an old woman's ankles as she carried a board. Just enough to make her feel steady without knowing why. He nudged a falling bolt sideways so it missed a boy's head by the width of a breath. He did not make a show of it. He moved his attention like a lamp. At the far end, past the last newly set anchor, a curve of rock made a natural little amphitheater where waves rehearsed their lines. Naruto slipped away from the end. Was to let his brain be a brain instead of a barricade. He sat and watched a snail mark a secret across wet stone. It took time. He let it. When the kunai came, it didn't sound like Zabuza's and it didn't move like a thug's. It sang wrong. Too quiet and too clean, like the absence of sound given a blade. Naruto's body reacted before his mind did. The air in front of his cheek tightened, the line where things stopped holding. The kunai should have thumped against that invisible inch and fallen, humbled. It didn't. It slowed. It worked through. Naruto felt the air peel away from it in measured slices. Like someone with delicate hands opening a stubborn page. It reached him, not the cool shock of metal in flesh but the heat of an almost, a kiss of force that left a sting and the smell of a storm. He caught it by the ring without thinking and held it up. The blade was etched with a sigil that made his eyes ache, a pattern that wanted to count the distance between him and everything else. ND declare a number where he knew there shouldn't be one. Sasuke was at his shoulder a heartbeat later, because Sasuke lived in heartbeats. New friend? He asked, wary and too casual. Naruto turned T. He kunai so the light caught the sigil and did not like it. Someone measured me, he said, and made it easy. He didn't say I felt it brush skin. He didn't say the world refused to be counted until just now. He didn't laugh. He put the little shock in his pocket and let the rest of him remain easy. Kakashi joined them. I narrowed, book forgotten as if forgetting it cost him. He looked at the sig. Ill and went still in a way Naruto didn't like. Where? Naruto pointed at the place in the air that still felt like a fingerprint. Kakashi's gaze tracked. He swore in his head and didn't let it out his mouth. Someone outside our usual mess, Kakashi said eventually. Keep that. Don't touch the mark more than you have to. Naruto watched the water throw itself at rock and break and try again. He felt the edge of his not-touchable space and the thread someone had run into it. He put the kunai away, carefully, and looked at his team, at this messy, precise morning that had gone from noise to math without asking permission. Okay, he said to no one in particular. We're doing it that way. Sakura arched a brow. Doing what which way? Being better, he said. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The day was already testing its limits. They finished the bridge with a rhythm that made sense. Naruto slept like someone convinced the ground would not betray him. Gojo didn't reappear. The absence felt like a grin. Hinata's team left at dawn, a neat ripple in the world where 4 people and a dog moved like they had practiced leaving without being missed. Naruto pretended he didn't notice. He did. When they set off for Konoha, Chizuna hugged Naruto with his whole chest. Naruto endured it, then returned it because some debts you pay in the same coin you were offered. The road back looked more ordinary than the road out. This is how roads do. The boat was just a boat. The fields were just fields. Naruto didn't stop the wind from touching him. At the village gate, Iruka waved as if his arm had forgotten how to be modest. Report later, he yelled. I heard you punched a fog. Something like that, Naruto called back. Kakashi peeled off to go have a conversation with a Hokage who would sigh and be both proud and worried, which seemed to be the Hokage's job. Sasuke made an uninterested noise and left to go train while absolutely thinking about everything he had seen. Sakura threatened Naruto with tea and questions. He accepted both. He ate, later, at Ichiraku again. The lanterns were the same. Steam made light into a thing he could pocket and carry. He didn't sit waiting for a blindfold to appear. He slurped noodles and held the kunai in his sleeve like a thorn you keep because it warns you about roses. Chuki, he said around a mouthful, if a very tall idiot swings by, tell him I used my taste. Chuki scratched his chin. Is that like seasoning? Exactly, Naruto said, grinning. I'm learning to cook. Ayame leaned over the counter. Don't burn the village. Trying not to. He stood, dropped coins, and let the curtain breathe against his shoulder as he left. The night outside was full of quiet problems and quiet solutions, and Naruto felt like a line written in clear ink. He walked the long way home and counted the places where his breath slowed a leaf and where it didn't. The kunai with the wrong math hummed against his sleeve. Somewhere, someone was writing their fear into the world with tidy lines. Naruto thought about Hinata's steady voice. Be careful how you choose to be untouchable. He looked up at the stars and decided to be the kind of wall that made a city possible instead of the kind that made a prison. If someone had measured him, fine. He would teach their numbers to be kind. He would stand in front of people until the people knew how to stand in front of others. He would not move for the worst of the world. He would make space for the rest. He went to sleep with that decision under his pillow and didn't notice when the blindfold man stepped out of a shadow on the street and smiled an unguarded smile, just for a second, like a teacher pleased by a student's handwriting. Good taste, Gojo said to the empty night, and Vani shed as if the next step were shorter than anyone had any right to expect. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Forest without footsteps. The exam hall smelled like graphite and unfriendly coffee. 100 kids pretended not to look at each other while the proctors pretended not to notice. Sunlight soaked through high windows and turned dust into slow fireworks. Naruto tapped his pencil once and didn't write. His world was lines and pressure. Ink ran across paper in little rivers that wanted to be straight and failed. Heartbeats made their own punctuation. The proctor at the far end, scarred scalp, bored posture, didn't glance up when a girl in the third row bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. He didn't need to. He already knew who would break. Naruto leaned back in his chair. He watched the boy at his left, not clan, not connections, too careful with the eraser. The kid's foot jittered like a trapped moth under the desk. The question sheet in front of him looked like a joke with the humor scraped off. Naruto didn't like jokes that punched down. He exhaled. The room shifted, subtle as a sigh. The space between paper and hand grew measurable. Dust slowed a fraction. The edge of the exam world softened where it brushed against him. Then he moved a finger, and blue tugged. just a whisper, just enough to pick up a thread of air in the papers it cradled. The sheet on the Proctor's clipboard lifted as he turned to cough. It drifted like a fish toward Naruto's desk, and the blank sheet in front of Naruto slid the other way, tidily, nobody looking where it mattered. The swap was clean. Naruto didn't keep the stolen answers. He traced the questions with his eyes, felt the shape of solutions, put down the pencil, and let the blue carry the correct page past his desk, past his sleeve. To land on the boy's stack so gently the boy blinked and thought he'd imagined the weight change. The kid's foot stopped jittering. He began to write in straight lines. Across the aisle, he girl with copper in her mouth lifted her head and caught Naruto's eye by accident. He waggled his pencil once in a stupid little salute. She snorted despite herself and returned to work. He didn't help everyone. That wasn't the point. He helped where his attention landed, like a lamp moving across a dark room. The lights that clicked on for good. Halfway through, Naruto stood up. No drama. He carried a blank sheet to the front and laid it on the scarred proctor's desk. The man's eye twitched. "You're done." "On time," Naruto said cheerfully. "Without answers. I answer by participation." "Sit down." "Pass me," Naruto said, and not softly. "Or fail me. Either way, my team is going to the next round." A few heads turned. Sasuke's didn't. He kept writing like the paper owed him rent. Sakura's ear tilted in Naruto's direction without daring to become an actual glance. Hinata, 3 rows back, different class, shuffled in with her team, lowered her pencil and let a breath leave her like a vow. The scarred proctor's mouth flattened into something that might have been the ghost of approval or the ghost of a headache. "Leave your name on the form." Naruto grinned, scrawled it, and left. As he passed, the desk of the Jitterfoot boy made a chuffing noise as if a paper had settled. Naruto didn't look. He didn't need to see the kid's face to know it had smoothed out into a person again. Outside, in the corridor, the world smiled at being simpler than people made it. Hinata found him under the stairwell where light fell in a thinning triangle. She didn't ask what he'd done. She looked at his posture like it was a new word she liked. "You threw the test at yourself and didn't touch it," she said, amused. "Working on taste," he said. "You're going to make the proctors angry. Then they'll remember my name." He tipped his head, parsing the murmurs of 100 nervous bodies behind a door. "You okay?" "I am," she said. "Kiba is not. Shino is," inside his head counting his insects. "It helps him think. Kiba will be fine." The world looks at him and forgets what it was doing. He swung his arms like a kid pretending not to be restless. "Forest next." Hinata's eyes softened. "You like forests now. I like choices." Anko, when she appeared, did not stroll so much as arrive in an attitude of mischief. She tossed a roll of heaven knows what into the air and caught it on a fingertip. "I hope none of you die," she said brightly. "It would ruin my day." She gestured at a fence that existed for rules, not for protection. "Welcome to the forest of death. Sign the waivers. Try not to sign in blood." Kiba groaned in the key of overexcited. Shino adjusted his collar. Hinata's hands were neat, efficient as she tied her forehead protector a fraction tighter. Sasuke teared through the trees like he wanted them to regret their choices. Sakura checked her pouch again and again until Naruto gently nudged her wrist with 2 fingers. She blinked, smiled, breathed. The gate sighed open. The forest swallowed noise. Birds made commentary, but distant. The ground was a careful patchwork of roots and leaf. Naruto's vision resolved into its new geometry. Leaves were not leaves but sets of intent, angles, trajectories, petty ambitions to fall at particular speeds. Chakra threaded the place like mycelium. He liked it. He liked the honest business of it. "Map?" Sasuke asked. "Working," Naruto said. He shifted infinity, thinner here, thicker there, not as a wall but as little round rooms. He placed one around Sakura's shoulder when a thorn thought too hard about pushing through her jacket. He left a raw spot around himself where anything interesting might try him. The first trap wasn't clever. Net, weights, a smear of paralytic. Sasuke saw it. Naruto let the net fall toward him. Then held it in the air like a disagreeable curtain and walked under it, letting the others pass. He liked making petty dangers feel noticed and dismissed. An hour in, the air sheared. It wasn't wind. It wasn't chakra that felt like chakra. The world took on a rhythm that didn't belong here. Naruto paused, head tilted, attention tightened into a wire. Stop, he said. Sakura froze mid-step. Sasuke's eyes slit red, then cooled. What? The ground, Naruto said. He set a twig down, made it roll. It bumped. Impossible. And then bumped again at equal distances, as if the leaf litter had tiny, invisible stairs. He knelt. He didn't touch. He felt. The space in front of his hand stuttered, not one smooth field but a stack of discrete layers trying to be friends and failing. Someone had sliced the air into grids and numbered the squares. He looked up. The trees wore tags now, paper charms that hadn't been there and had always been there, depending on whether you believed in shadows that learned to count. The ink on them made his vision itch. Sakura's voice narrowed. Trap. Worse, Naruto said. Measurement. Sasuke's mouth twitched as if tasting an unfamiliar spice. Can you make it worse for them? Yes. Naruto smiled a little and moved his hand. Blue seeped. A river ran sideways through a field. He didn't try to break the quantized air. He bled it, smudged the lines between the invisible squares until the steps were too small to matter. Infinity wanted to be whole. He let it remember. Sakura touched an edge. Her finger hesitated, then slid as if the floor had become a polite idea again. Someone's here, Sasuke said, just as a team in stone gray hit the clearing with the athletic malice of boys who had enjoyed roughing up cats. They were wrong. Not the faces. Faces can be right and wrong at once. Their chakra tasted like a tuning fork held too close to bone. Genin from stone, the lead announced with a grin that was all teeth. You Konoha kids shouldn't be here. Sasuke sighed like a poet with a splitting headache. The sign on the gate said, Forest of Death. Did you mistake it for your mother's garden? The boy lunged. Naruto did not let him arrive. He placed a rounding error in the air between the lunge and the target and watched the boy's foot strike a space half an inch to the left of where the world expected it. The boy skidded, caught himself, stared. The second boy threw a weighted rope with little tags stitched along its length. The rope hummed, not in sound but in fit, each tag trying to lock a bubble of space into a particular size. Naruto tilted his head and tugged. Blue caught one tag and made it skip a beat. The rope hiccuped and wrapped around the first boy's leg instead. Sakura moved like a well-timed line break, precise, placed. She punched the breath out of the third boy before he finished his dramatic declaration. Those aren't genin, Sasuke said. His Sharingan chewed on the way the rope behaved and spat out disgust. No, Naruto said. They're here to count me. The lead glared, not offended, adjusting. Null division, he said proudly, because some people can't resist introducing themselves while breaking the law. We don't like variables that won't sit still. Naruto wished, briefly, that Gojo were here to laugh at that. Then he did something better with the wish. He pointed at Sakura and tilted two fingers. Go long. He flicked his wrist at Sasuke, left flank. They didn't argue. They moved like they'd been told something obvious. The null boy with the rope yanked a tag free and slapped it on a tree. The air around the trunk cubed itself. Infinity shivered at the edges, trimmed into a quantized prism with neat corners. Naruto spread his focus thin, made a moving corridor of soft air through the bad math. And then did a thing he would not have done a month ago. He stepped into the worst of the grid and took the weight of it on his own skin. It itched like a sunburn on his nerves. He could feel his shield wanting to resolve into discrete shells, like stacked glass. On me, he called. He didn't shout. He invited, and his team arrived because they liked arriving where he was. Sakura ran with her, mouth set in a line that dared the world to scuff it. Sasuke slid under a branch, eyes spinning like old electricity. Naruto held the corridor open and moved it as they moved until the bad math gave up trying to catch them. The null boys adapted. Of course they did. The one with the rope had soldier eyes. He listened the way you listen to orders through walls. He slapped 3 tags in the shape of a right angle and the air inside shrank by a quarter. It didn't crush. It just insisted. Rude, Naruto said, and made himself smile because sometimes expressions are tools. He met the right angle with his own. Curled blue down the inside edge until the angle remembered it had never truly been sharp. Wind flared. Paper sang. Tenten dropped out of the canopy like a solution, hair tied up, eyes brie. GHT with a craftsman's focus you could hinge a door on. She didn't ask questions. She had already built a hypothesis. She flicked open a scroll in midair. Silk lines leapt out, weighted, silver bright. Along their cores with threads of sealing ink. The nearest null boy cut at the first line and found the silk reluctant to be cut. Anchors, she said, breath quick with interest. Tell me where. Naruto pointed without thinking. There, and there. Hook the lines on the edge. What edge? You'll feel it. She did. Her mouth twitched in delighted disbelief, as if she'd reached into a river and grabbed a current. The silk lines went taut, anchored to nothing that could be seen, to a seam between steps that Naruto held open with the flat of his will. The rope of tags snarled around silk, lost count, shivered. Kiba crashed in behind her, mud-spattered, grinning like a dog with a stolen boot. We heard fighting. Also Akamaru hates this place. Also, who are these fashion disasters? Null division, Naruto said. Kiba wrinkled his nose as if it were a smell. Sounds like milk you left out. Hinata landed on a branch above them, light and precise. Her gaze swept the tags, the shimmer of their quantized cubes. Naruto's thin corridors of mercy. There, she said, quiet, and tapped 2 fingers twice in a code she'd invented last week to mean the safer path was 5 paces starboard. Naruto shift, ed the corridor there before she finished tapping. Shino, Kiba barked, gnats on the paper. Shino didn't respond with words. His swarm moved like a thought unfolding. The insects ate ink. The tags lost cohesion. The air exhaled. The null lead tried to reset the field with a hissed command that wasn't shinobi hand signs but a sequence of numbers he flicked with his fingers. Naruto beat him to it. By changing the base the room counted in. He pushed blue through 4 tags at once and let each one tug toward the other until their insistences canceled out. The grid hiccuped and fell apart. One bow. Y slammed into a tree he'd been sure wasn't where it was. Retreat. The lead snapped, efficient now. They melted back into the underbrush with the speed of people not panicking, which is always worse than people who are. Let them, Naruto said. He could feel them, feel the counting hum like a mosquito several clearings away. He filed the direction and let the feeling go. We're not here for them. Tenten reeled in her silk, eyes bright and hungry in the way of someone who'd just learned that reality had a new nail to hang things on. You owe me a conversation, she told Naruto. I'm having 3 of those today, he said ruefully. We'll make it 1, she said, decisive, and vaulted back into the trees with a last precise smile at Hinata like women who recognized in each other the urge to prepare. They moved deeper. The forest watched, interested. Naruto felt the shift of air patterns just ahead of them that said a snake was rehearsing an ambush, and before the rehearsal turned into performance the smell changed. It smelled like formaldehyde and patience. The chakra in the air got older without getting bigger. The trees thought about bowing. A woman with a face you'd forget on purpose stepped out of the brush. Her smile was polite in the way overripe fruit is polite, that sense of sweetness you don't trust. Long hair. Long tongue. A forehead protector from the village hidden in. The grass that sat on her like a bad joke. Sakura's hand found a kunai without showing its journey. Sasuke's eyes reinterpreted the world as threat and invitation. Hinata's gaze went distant and precise as she looked at flows beneath skin. Kiba didn't grin anymore. Akamaru made a sound like a small thunder. Naruto, the woman said, tasting his name as if for texture more than meaning. What a pretty trick. The air loves you. How do you make it do that? Boundaries, Naruto said, because sometimes truth is less useful than either lie or silence. And good manners. Ah, she said, her even teeth were the part of the smile that lied. I am terrible at those. The snakes came from everywhere and nowhere. They were not meant to kill. They were meant to crowd, to force attention into a fun. Until the funnel was the only thing left. Naruto gave them the smallest amount of attention they deserved. He watched their arc, felt the vector of their arrival, the little decision to be exactly air, and then he drew a line in the air like a teacher draws a margin. He didn't think of it as a domain. He thought of it as a classroom where only necessary motion was allowed. The world hushed, edges crisped. The smell of chalk that wasn't there touched the back of his throat. Within that rectangle of insistence, the snakes lost the messy option of being everywhere. They had to choose. Few chose correctly. The rest touched the margin and slid along it, like rain along a pane of glass. Sasuke blinked into the new geometry and smirked because of course Naruto's idea of power looked like a frame for a lesson. Sakura moved inside it like she'd always wanted the world to have margins. Hinata's eyes widened, not in fear, but at recognition. This was how you told a battlefield where to be soft and where to be hard. The woman's face shook like something shedding an expression. She tilted her head, curious in a way that wasn't human. What a waste, she purred. To use a room like that to save people instead of dissecting them. Naruto made a small, neat decision. Sasuke, Sakura, out. Blue grabbed them, not hands, just the agreement of distance deciding to become shorter in one direction. They slid, not dragged, across space. Through a gap that hadn't existed a heartbeat before, to a tree that wasn't there, now was, and then forgot it hadn't been. Hinata stayed because she hadn't been named. Naruto liked that about her. The obedience to sense, not to sound. The woman shed her skin. Not metaphorically. It peeled away with a dry whisper, and the shape under it was not grass. The Escher of a predator who had lived too long made the leaves face down. Eyes like pale lamps. A mouth that smiled because it could. Orochimaru, Hinata whispered, only enough wind on the word to make it exist. Naruto did not let the name take root in the moment. Names made stories. Stories made ruts. He preferred choices. Orochimaru's attention pressed him like a gloved hand. Who gave you the habit of drawing borders so tastefully? A friend, Naruto said. I'm not a lab. Everything is a lab if you insist. A tongue tasted the air. I'm interested in your boy with the eyes. The pale gaze. Flicked toward Sasuke like a promise of bad weather. Naruto killed a snake without touching it. He let red swell, then repented, bringing it back down to a push instead of a tear. The carcass slid away as if someone had scrubbed it with violence. He didn't look away from Orochimaru. You're not interested in me. Oh, I am. But there's only one of you. There are many of him. I didn't ask how many hearts you wanted to break. Naruto said. His smile was too clean. I asked if you were interested in me. Less the trick, Orochimaru said, amused, more the boy who would stand where knives go. Then we're done, Naruto said, and closed the margin. For a breath, the classroom went away. The world rushed back in. The snakes rejoiced. Naruto opened something smaller and sharper where Uru's trailing skin tried to slip under his guard. He trapped the shed thing between two decisions and slammed red into it. It didn't explode. It ceased to be the kind of thing that could matter. Orochimaru's head tilted, pleased. Precision, he said. How dreary. How safe. How infuriating. Leave, Naruto said. He did not raise his voice. He laid it, like a letter on a table. Orochimaru laughed without making the shape of laughter. Not today, he said, which was exactly the wrong thing to say to a boy who had decided what today would be. He melted backward. The trees breathed easier before they remembered they shouldn't. Sasuke landed beside Naruto with a face so carefully blank it cracked in the corner. Next time, he said. Not if I get a vote, Naruto said. You don't always get a vote, Sasuke said, not unkind. Which was new. Then I'll build a ballot box, Naruto said. Sakura pushed hair out of her face and glared at the place Orochimaru had been as if she could edit him from the page with enough scorn. I hate him. Get in line, Kiba muttered, wiping snake on his sleeve. Don't, Hinata said, voice sudden and clear. The tags. Naruto felt it then. The hush coming from the east. Different from the quiet of forests and predators and men who'd chosen silence. This was the absence of signal. A silence that made even insects forget their jobs. The hair on his arms did not rise. It lay down. White noise, he said, tasting the edges. Null. The corridor of no sound ate its way toward them like sugar into tea. Run, Kiba suggested. Walk, Naruto said. He slid blue thr. Out the hush and watched it not vibrate. All right, fine. So it wouldn't sing. It would still flow. He peeled a strip of ordinary sound around their feet. A little pocket where footsteps believed in themselves. On me. Don't leave my shadow. They moved through a forest that forgot how to be loud. The birds watched and did not comment. Naruto held his little strip of noise tight, frugal with it, He way you hold breath while swimming between wreckage and a school of knives. Hinata's hand brushed his sleeve once, the line for I'm here, I'm with you, he didn't look, he felt. They reached the toe, on the third day because time had been polite enough to behave. Teams arrived in tatters or triumph. Bandages made statements more honest than boasts. When Naruto stepped into the main hall, the IR did a thing his shield did on instinct, it primed for impact. At first it looked like fatigue, like kids muttering with the flat voices you get when you've been hungry and clever too long. Then he Otic the way their words died before reaching ears, sound cutting off at ankle height like fog pooling on a floor. The proctor at the far end, dark hair, ordinary face, clipboard with the hope beat out of it, didn't make any sound at all when he cleared his throat. Hinata's breath feathered his shoulder. Sasuke's jaw set, Sakura's eyes went flatter than mirrors. The floor was a lake of hush. You could step in and be unmade into quiet. The proctor looked up. His eyes were not a person's eyes. They were gauges that read in clean numbers. Null. Naruto smiled. Not delighted. Not friendly. The EXPR. Eshin was mathematical. 2 lines meeting at a point with no wasted curve. He took one step forward into the hush. Sound left him. He knew that because the world did not register the scuff of his sandal or the breath in his chest. But the step existed anyway. And then the next. He felt for the edges the way you feel for a countertop in the dark. The hush had corners. He turned one with his should. And let the blue trail behind him like a chalk line only he could see. The proctor's mouth made shapes. No noise. His hands shifted to pull a something from a pocket that was probably a paper charm with bad intentions. Naruto kept walking. His team fell in behind without asking. Hinata touched 2 fingers to the line to feel the root. Sasuke's eyes spun and narrowed on the proctor's sleeve. Sack. Ura looked at the kids stuck in the edges of the room, mouths open with words half-formed, and sorted them by who would fall first if the quiet turned harder. Naruto reached the center of the room where the hush was deepest and stopped. He let infinity thin to skin. He let the world press against him until the counting in the proctor's eyes stuttered by 1. Then he spoke, knowing none of them would hear it yet. Speaking anyway so the shape of the words would be ready when sound remembered itself. You came to measure me, he said. Measure this. He put his hand up and drew a little circle on nothing. The circle wasn't a shield. It was an invitation for sound to sit down. He set it on the floor like a bowl and poured a whisper into it. The whisper thickened. It spread. It touched the shoes of a kid shivering in the back, and the kid flinched, laughed, realizing he had made a sound again. The proctor's face stayed ordinary. His eyes ticked, disappointed. He lifted the charm. Naruto stepped closer. He could hear nothing. He could feel everything. The charm's surface wanted to declare a discrete number of steps between Naruto and all people, enforce it, make the air snap to a grid. Not today, Naruto said again, mouth forming the words with a calm he had earned. He lifted his hand like a man knocking on a door he owns. And walked into the white noise. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Bells that don't ring. The hush in the tower wasn't quiet. It was a subtraction. It lifted every sound by the throat and set it down somewhere you couldn't reach. Naruto stepped into it anyway. The floor felt slick in a way that had nothing to do with stone. The hush pressed against his face like a soft hand that didn't mean to be cruel and couldn't help itself. He moved his palm as if drawing a circle. Eon fog and offered the world a place to put noise. Sound pooled there, thin, stubborn, like a whisper making a nest. A kid near the back hiccuped aloud in shock at hearing his own throat again. Sakura darted to him and kept him upright without breaking Naruto's chalkline of sound. Sasuke didn't waste the corridor Naruto made. He walked it like a razor to the proctor at the front, black hair, clipboard. No opinion about sunlight, and flicked his wrist. The man's sleeve should have rustled. It didn't, but the paper charm in his fist made the air wince, and that was enough for Sasuke. Kunai met forearm with precise disapproval. The charm spun away. Naruto tugged from across the room, just a nudge of blue, and the charm landed in his hand instead of underfoot. The proctor's face didn't change. His eyes read numbers only he could see. And Naruto saw the moment those numbers failed to match the room. You don't own silence, Naruto said. He couldn't hear himself. He made sure the boy he was saying it to would. The proctor opened his mouth, closed it. The hush deepened, petulant, greedy, until Naruto's little bowl shuddered. Hinata touched 2 fingers to his forearm, a question. He didn't look. He let his domain come down like the memory of a classroom, a rectangle of permission with edges that kept disaster from wandering in and making a mess. Inside it, motion became what he allowed it to be. The hush hit the border and ran along it like water on glass. The proctor moved, fast. Not shinobi fast. A different fast, in the rhythm of a metronome set by someone who believed time should obey. Paper flashed. Another charm came up, its ink crowded with characters that wanted the world to stop pretending it was continuous. Sasuke cut his wrist a second time and made it look like boredom. Sack. Ura stepped into the slack of Naruto's sound and spoke to the immobilized kids in a calm that refused to be edited out. Feet on the line, one at a time, breathe. The man realized he was dangerous only if he could enforce his count. Naruto reversed the math. He unrolled blue across the floor like ribbon and let it gather every stray scrape and breath the hush hadn't eaten. When the ribbon brushed the charm's edge, it smudged the numbers. Not an explosion. A failure to agree. The charm dimmed. The hush hiccuped again. The proctor reached toward the inside of his cheek with his tongue. Naruto saw the intent sharpen in his jaw, and bit down on whatever final measure he'd hidden there. Naruto was there between bite and blood, hand closing around the proctor's jaw as if they were friends, and he knew exactly how much to ask a face to hold still. Infinity tightened to his skin. Teeth met nothing. He felt the little glass ampule crack in safety instead of catastrophe. He looked into unremarkable eyes that had never been used to recognize people. You can't count me, Naruto said quietly, and this time sound carried because he let it. But you can choose something else. The man blinked, not to answer but because blinking was a default. Then his body went loose in the particular way bad training makes you go, like a puppet whose strings are cut at the wrong angle. He slumped. Kakashi appeared, somehow already there. One hand finding pressure points with casual, moral efficiency. Thank you for not making me file paperwork for death by hush, Kakashi murmured. Adds to my word count. Naruto placed the charm in a pouch lined with sealing wire and glanced at the kids finding noise again as if they were waking from a bad story. Sasuke met his eye, Sharingan dulled, and shrugged. Chi enough to deliver. I will never like you being necessary, but I like that you are. Sakura squeezed Naruto's arm once and took her hand back like she'd always meant to. Who are they? A kid with an accent asked, voice shaky. Fear looking for a label to staple itself to. People who think they can make the world neat, Naruto said. We are not going to let them. The Hokage's office smelled like ink and old, expensive smoke. Light fell through the blinds in careful stripes that wanted to be more important than they were. Hiruzen Sarutobi listened with his whole age, which was a better kind of old than most. He turned the charm in his fingers without touching the ink. Null division, he said, as if naming it were putting a match to a thread he'd been smelling for years. The daimyos have secrets even from each other. They do not like factors they cannot tax. Then I'm about to ruin their day, Naruto said. Not alone, Hiruzen said, and the line of his mouth softened. Not ever again, if I can help it. Kakashi leaned against the window frame like a man who had decided he was furniture. Mission assignment, Lord Third. Hiruzen's eyes moved from the charm to Naruto, to Hinata Nd Tenten waiting just behind him by virtue of refusing not to be included. There have been incidents in the land of demons. A shrine's bell ceased to ring, and with it caravans ceased to arrive. Reports speak of silence. Not fear. Not bandits. Silence. White noise, Naruto said. The words fit too well. We cannot spare a formal squad, Hiruzen said, which is the kind of thing leaders of villages say when they already know who will go even if they prohibit it. And yet, I'm going, Naruto said. Kakashi didn't object. He was quiet a moment, something like a memory standing on his shoulder. When he spoke, he made it sound lazy. He chooses his team. Sasuke and Sakura stay, Naruto said. They finish the exam and make sure our house doesn't fall over while I'm out finding out who keeps measuring it. He looked to his right. Hinata. A nod from her. No flinch. No blush. Just the exactness of consent. Tenten. I packed on the way here. She patted a scroll case. I want to see this silence and pin it to a wall. Hiruzen smiled like a grandparent signing off on a bad idea because it was the right bad idea. I will pretend you disobeyed me, he told Kakashi. You will pretend to be surprised. He passed the charm back to Naruto. Do not touch the ink. Naruto tucked it away. I'll bring you a bell that remembers its job. I'll settle for you coming home, the old man said, and then added, softer, go. They left by the east road where the fields pretend villages forever, until the earth drops into ravines and the sky remembers it has a job too. Hiba saw them off with a vulgar joke and a bag of jerky. Shino tilted his head as if filing Naruto under a new taxonomy. Sasuke didn't come. Sakura pressed tea into Naruto's hands and scolded him to rest like she wasn't. Worried and then almost smiled when he promised to try. The path turned to gravel, then to beaten dirt, then to a tread people had made by virtue of refusing to let the grass have it back. Hinata kept pace easily, hands light near her sides, eyes sometimes distant with Byakugan, sometimes not, choosing not to pry, which Naruto noticed and liked. Tenten walked like a craftsman shopping for ideas, every boulder a potential fulcrum. Every twig a shiv with self-esteem. By noon they had a rhythm and by dusk a story told in 3 voices. Tenten. If the tags, quantize, the air, I can sew them to something that insists on being continuous. Silk is fickle but vain, it likes to be itself. Naruto. Blue likes pulleys. If you make a loop in the right place, I can pull on nothing and make it hold. Hi, Nada. I can see where the boundaries stress the capillaries. If the world has veins, and it does, I can touch the pulse without bruising it. They camped near a fallen cedar whose roots held a loaf of earth the size of a wagon above the ground like a table. Tenten cooked badly and Hinata fixed it without comment. Naruto watched sparks rise and keep rising because he let them, a little grin earning its way out of him every time one would have fallen and reconsidered. Do you always do that? Tenten asked, squinting at the little standoff between gravity and showmanship. Only when someone is impressed, Naruto said, and took a rice ball to the shoulder. Hinata laughed once and looked away as if to hide it and then decided not to. He set the laugh somewhere careful. They arrived at the land of demons on feet that wanted a bath and a bell that refused to ring. The shrine sat on a shoulder of hill, plain and old in the way things get when everyone believes in them without talking about it. The bell hung under the eaves. Massive and dark, rope coiled neat beneath. Villagers had gathered in 2 kinds of circles, one around the steps with worry cooking into superstition, one around the tea kettles with superstition cooking into gossip. At the top, a girl about their age in formal whites stood barefoot on worn wood. She had the unremarkable face of someone people tell important things to. Her hair was almost too neat, like the comb you put on purpose. And her eyes, when they found Naruto, looked unsurprised. Priestess Shion, Hinata asked softly. Shion nodded once. Konoha, she said, and that was half greeting, half judgment. She looked at the bell rope as one looks at a wounded limb. The bell has lost its noise. Bells don't lose noise, Tenten said. People take it. Shion's gaze didn't move. Noise is a contract, she said. We stop ringing when we have nothing to say. Or when someone tells the air to forget. Naruto liked her already. Show me where it stops. She led them to the rope. The fibers were sweat-polished, prayer-worn. Hinata's Byakugan slid through it and here Naruto saw her see what he saw, little edges where the world had been filed neat. She flinched, just barely. It's like something counted the space between the rope and the bell and decided there should be exactly that and no more. White noise, Naruto said, and Shion made a face like a math emetician hearing a kindergartner name calculus, not in condescension but because sometimes the child coined a better word. White noise, she repeated. Good. Names are leashes, not always for people. She placed her palm on the rope. Her barrier rose around her like breath you could see if the winter were worse. Naruto let his domain tilt into being around that, careful as a hand over a candle. The 2 fields met and didn't fight. They hummed against each other like tuning forks finding agreement. The world went still. Naruto saw absence, and it wasn't emptiness. It had borders and angles, see. Corners where a silence had been nailed on in overwork. He could count the missing sound in units of ache. Kaisei. Shion said. That's the name on the papers the raiders dropped last week. He drew the quiet the way a mason sets stone. He thinks he's building a temple. Then he'll hate to see someone sand the edges. Naruto smiled without humor. He closed his hand on the air between rope and bell and pulled, not hard enough. Blue took the slack where quiet had been overstretched. He held the circle open like a teacher making space at a crowded desk. Shion tugged. The bell moved a hair and made the memory of a sound. A rustle in the trees. Not leaves. People. The kind who arrive convinced they own where they put their feet. Tenten's hands were already at a scroll. Hinata stood without bracing and the world did it for her. Naruto felt the practical poetry of that and held his corridor wider. Men in pale gray stepped into the courtyard with their shoulders set in the shape of efficiency. Their weapons were lacquered wood and paper and steel that looked mathematically satisfied with itself. At their center a man with a narrow face and a kind of politeness that meant he didn't spoil his uniform with emotions. He set his pack down and took out a bundle of paper the size of a loaf. The ink was red like well-behaved blood. Null division, he said, with the good manners of an executioner who has polished his blade. And bowed. Lieutenant Kaisei. This place has ceased to serve the safety of the realm. We're repossessing its gods. Rude, Tenten murmured. You didn't bring a cart. Kaisei's eyes flicked across her and away. He looked at Shion and softened his mouth into something like sympathy. No one will harm you. The silence will make you safer. Shion smiled almost gently. Silence makes murderers feel tidy. Kaisei lifted his hands and spread his fingers as if shaping clay, and the sound fell out of the world. White noise. It didn't smash. It pressed, evenly. The prayer strips on the eaves went still. The kettles. Steam rose without hiss. A child cried without crying. Naruto closed the last gap between his domain and Shion's barrier and felt the hush push back like a patient ocean. He let his field become less room and more margin, a neat insistence around Shion's heart, around Hinata's pulse, around Tenten's quick hands. He left himself thin. Kaisei walked forward, choosing each step by number. His men fanned in a curve that did not curve. It was a straight broken into many little straight bits and joined. Tenten dropped 3 silk lines that should have rattled. The lines unfurled like breath. Kaisei snapped a charm and the silk tried to snap to the grid. Tenten's mouth twitched into a private curse. Naruto brushed blue along the silk at 2 points and made a loop. The line hummed in sympathy neither of them could hear. Hinata's hand closed on Shion's wrist and tapped twice. Window, and then once, there. She wasn't asking for trust. She was lending it. Shion met her eyes and nodded and let her barrier breathe. Kaisei raised his loaf of papers and tore one free. The charm insisted. The rope trembled. The bell stared down like a judge who wanted to be a grandfather. Naruto changed tactics. He stopped trying to pour sound into a bowl and instead invited the world to borrow his pulse. He exhaled, and the rope, the bell, the air, borrowed. Shion tugged. The bell rang. No volume. At first. Just the concept of ringing asserting itself in defiance of math. Then louder, as if the sound were remembering how to be a body. The ring punched a clean hole in white noise. It traveled down the hill into the village and people looked up from tea that didn't boil and found that their mouths could make words again. Kaisei didn't flinch. He changed the numbers faster. The hush tightened. It climbed the bell's skin in tidy steps, trying to strangle the resonance at its throat. Again, Naruto said, not to Shion but to everyone. He held his domain like a book open to the right page. Hinata's palm met the bell through rope and barrier. Gentle fist turned so careful it became a caress that touched only the line where silence had set teeth. The so-und ducked and then burst out under her hand with a laugh. Tenten threw anchors at nothing, nails with caps stamped in seal script. She couldn't see what she nailed. She didn't have to. Naruto pointed, with a glance and she pinned the edge of white noise to itself, stitching it in place long enough for sound to walk past without being asked for papers. Kaisei reached into the loaf. This charm wasn't like the others. The ink on it reminded Naruto of the kunai that had brushed his cheek by the bridge. The characters wanted to declare distance to be a series of treads you had to count across. He would not make the same mistake twice. He stepped forward, not faster but earlier, putting his body where the math wanted to finish before it started. Kaisei cut towards him, a float of paper that would have meant, stop, as a law. Naruto took the cut. He let the paper kiss his wrist and burn like a cold. He didn't let it bite deeper. He felt the numbers trying to segment the space around his skin. He accepted the first slice and then disassembled the second with his breath. Kaisei's eyes flickered when the charm lost purchase. That was all Naruto needed. Blue caught the charm's far corner and folded it into his palm. Kaisei stepped back, not surprised, adjusting. He flicked 2 fingers at his men and they spread, heels hitting the beats of a metronome. Naruto adjusted the perimeter, open in little pockets where villagers could fall into safety, closing doors where knives wanted to be doors. Hinata moved like a note not everyone hears but everyone feels. She put herself exactly where Tenten's anchors would hold the best. Shien's barrier swelled when the hush pressed and softened when sound remembered. It felt less like defense and more like consent. This is what the world is allowed to do, this is what it is not. The bell rang a second time. This one had teeth. Kaisei did not like the taste. He snapped his fingers and the hush went from patient to predatory. Naruto felt it, not on his ear, but on his skin. On the tiny hairs of his arm lying down again. He committed to being the floor. He stopped being boy and became boundary, the place where things decide which way is in. Take him, Kaisei told 2 of his men. Not shouting, only placing orders in the world where they fit. They came with blades too clean. Naruto didn't meet the blades. He met where they would have been and made the swords arrive there late. The men stumbled. Tenten cut their belts with thread that wouldn't be cut. Hinata touched a wrist with the tenderness of a doctor and ended the hand's argument with the sword. Kaisei measured the failing and changed the scale. He pulled a charm that had no ink on it, only absence, and flung it at the bell. Shien caught it with her palm through her barrier and winced. The absence tried to eat her hand. Hinata's fingers closed over Shien's knuckles, and Naruto put his hand over both of theirs, and the 3 of them held the thing that wanted to be nothing but eat them until it admitted it had edges after all. The bell rang a third time. The hush cracked. Kaisei stepped back, lifted 2 fingers in a straight, an interesting line, and his men fell away like water finding downhill. He watched Naruto with the professional attention of a man noting a phenomenon so he could design the next apparatus to cage it. His voice, when it returned to the air like a bird whose wing had been splinted, was mild. You are not a god, Kaisei said. Good, Naruto said, pocketing the charm he'd burned his wrist catching. They get bad press. This is not personal. It will be if you keep showing up. Kaisei's mouth permitted itself the suggestion of a smile. Our oracle said the boy who refuses to be measured would love bells. Your oracle should try ramen, Naruto said. Because jokes are doors sometimes. He didn't throw it like a stone, he set it on the table and left it there. Kaisei bowed. Not respect, acknowledgement of geometry. Until the next test. You're the one being tested, Tenten said. Then you should study, Kaisei said, and left with the hush condensing around his heels like a well-behaved dog. The bell kept ringing. Not constantly, not foolishly. It tolled 3 times and then settled into itself the way a spine settles when you stop asking it to carry too much. Villagers came up the hill with words in their mouths. They touched Shien's sleeve as if she'd let them. She did. She told a boy to wipe his nose and an old woman to drink water and a man not to sell his goats for an idea that didn't feed anyone. She moved in her place with domesticated dignity of someone who has been given responsibility for the dull parts of miracles. When the steps had finished being crowded, she found Naruto standing under the bell as if listening for echoes you couldn't hear. She didn't thank him. She held up her burned palm instead. It tried to rewrite the air, she said. It tried to count it, he said, and took her hand as if to check a pulse. He didn't touch the injury. He traced the air over it. The numbers on the charm inside his pouch shifted a little, like ashamed gears. Her eyes didn't flick to his face and then away, the way Peo look at boys they've heard stories about. She held his gaze and asked him like a craftsman asking another, what do you call the room you make? Depends on the day, he said, and glanced at Hinata. Tenten and let his grin be a little foolish on purpose. Today it was a classroom. Shion considered that and nodded, as if she'd been expecting either that or an answer about swords and was glad to have the one with chalk. I saw something, she said in a tone that warned him not to argue with it. Priests use voices like that when they need to pin reality and interrogate it. While the bell was remembering. A path leading underground, not far from here, where the silence has been bred in tanks. Orochimaru, Hinata said. The tags we took off Kaisei's men have sketches of the place, Tenten added. Mouth already moving ahead of her, hands designing a way in. They share fences, Null and the snake. This one's on a border. I can make anchors hold a doorway open, if you give me a seam. Shion tilted her head. If you break it, they will come to count your pieces. They already tried, Naruto said, and his smile sharpened without losing its warmth. I'd like to show them how many kinds of pieces there are. The facility hid under a slope where the hill's shadow forgot to leave at noon. From above, it was a stand of scrub. From the right angle, the scrub wore a pattern. From the right eyes, the pattern was a door that didn't deserve to be. Tenten set anchors in the places Naruto pointed out with one finger each. The nails went into nothing and made it something. Silk lines are, and from anchor to anchor with the soft insistence of thread in a seam. Shion touched the dirt at the threshold and her barrier spread under it like clean water. Hinata's eyes were winter-bright. She called out patrols as outlines. Not people. Naruto put his palm to the air and found the seam. It didn't want to be found. He coaxed it. He told it a joke about gravity and etiquette and doors that close themselves. And it laughed and loosened. He pulled. The door opened without admitting it had ever been closed. They slipped into a corridor so white you could shave with your reflection and so clean it looked sick. The air kept its breath. It did not like to be asked to carry smells. Tenten's eyes went hawk-sharp with outrage at the hardware, good steel in the service of bad ideas. Hinata's frown softened nothing. Shion walked as if blessing the ground by forcing it to admit it was floor. Left, Hinata murmured, tapping 2 fingers and then 1, 2, pause, 1, door. Corridor, guard who isn't thinking about his mother. Naruto changed the shape of a corner so the guard turned and walked into it. The man blinked, lost in a geometry that replaced him gently 30 feet away, still unaware, ready late to a round that would find him on the wrong side of a shift change. They reached the cells without anyone needing to be hurt yet. There were 6. 3 held shadows. 1 held a boy with the look of a math problem no teacher had checked. 1 held a woman asleep with her chin on her chest. The last had a girl sitting upright with fury coiled inside her like a spring that had learned patience. Her hair was red that took itself seriously. Her eyes were a cautious, hot coin. She wore a ridiculous white gown meant to make prisoners forget they were people. She looked at Naruto as if he were a skylight breaking a ceiling and she was deciding whether to find that rude. Hi, Naruto said. I'm going to open your door and ask you to leave. You can also help me open the other doors or yell at me about the ethics of not opening some of them. Your choice. She blinked. The fury rearranged itself into contempt wearing curiosity like earrings. You're an Uzumaki, she said, as if he'd confessed to being a kind of weather. He smiled crooked. And you are very observant. Everything in this room tastes like salt and an apology, she said, a little breathless, a little cruel. Who taught you to grin like it's a weapon you only use on dessert? Tenten, Naruto said solemnly, and Tenten, who was sawing a lock off with wire that had no interest in being a saw, said, don't drag me into your bad metaphors. Without looking up, the girl stood. Chains clinked at her wrists, eager to measure her. She didn't sit them kindly. Karen, she said, I am not going to be grateful for release I didn't request. You're going to be complicated. That's fine, Naruto said, and slid blue into the locks and sides as if the tumblers were shy and needed coaxing. The door didn't open so much as lose interest in being closed. Karen stepped out with a deceptive carefulness that efficiently concealed the fact that she was deciding how to turn the first person who tried to grab her into an anecdote. She looked past Naruto to Hinata and Tenten and something in her shoulders eased. She looked at Shion and measured not a threat but an equation she didn't like the answer to and moved on. Her gaze came back to Naruto and snagged. She reached, impulsive, as if to touch his sleeve, and then changed her mind with an economy of motion that impressed him. Your chakra, she said, as if tasting a spice. She'd hated as a child and was suspiciously enjoying now. It's loud. Working on taste, he said automatically. She snorted. You're the kind of idiot who throws himself between numbers and people, aren't you? Yes, Naruto said, happy to be briefly simple. Help me throw better. He moved to the next cell. This lock did not want to admit it had an inside. He put red through it like a breath and let it be undone without fuss. The boy inside stared at him like people do when the door opens and the future knocks too soon. He stepped out. The woman behind him woke to Shien's hand on her cheek, as if being called from the bottom of a pool by someone holding a towel. An alarm tried to shout and remembered it had been invited to a silent party. It flickered in the lights instead. Null's ink was in the ceiling. A soft grid that tasted like Kaisei had been here teaching a cousin how to be tidy. Now we leave, Tenten said. Now, she had learned to trust her own sense of when a room's patience expired. They didn't run. They moved with the precision of people who had decided not to make noise in a place that chewed noise and spat numbers. The corner that had been changed remembered itself at an inconvenient time. The guard returned to find the corridor wrong and decided that meant he was wrong, and that meant he was angry. He drew a blade that had no business being that quiet and lifted it on a breath that meant to be the last thing someone heard. Karen moved. Her chains weren't the heavy kind meant to shame a prisoner. They were the thin ones that come out of your hands. You are an Uzumaki and have too many ancestors whispering polite atrocities in your blood. They flickered red gold, delicate where they should have been brutal. They struck the blade at the point it wanted to matter and made it change its mind. Naruto felt the tug of her chains on the edges he held and adjusted to make the seam she needed. Tenten threw an anchor to give the chain a place to pretend to fasten. The guard found his hand bound to a choice he did not like. Hinata's palm touched his shoulder and asked the question gentle fist asks when it wants to leave a man alive to reconsider his decisions. They made the door the way they'd made the first. A seam, opened, walked. Shien held the threshold for the last villager Naruto didn't know he was going to save until he noticed he was saving him. They came out into afternoon like a secret that had decided to be an announcement. Fresh air made a statement in their mouths. Naruto set a hand briefly on the dirt and the dirt believed him when he told it the door would be tired for a while. Karen tugged her chains back into her skin with a small shiver of distaste. She looked at Naruto, then at Hinata, then at Tenten, and decided to scowl to avoid doing anything more vulnerable. You're all very stupid, she said. You will die rescuing people who won't write you thank you letters. Probably, Naruto said, no apology in it. She stared at him the way you stare at a cliff you intend to climb if only to prove the view is overrated. Fine, she said, I'm coming with you until you do something too stupid to bear, at which point I'll push you out of the way and make fun of you for having let me. Welcome to the team, Tenten said dryly. I didn't say. You did, Hinata said gently, and the corners of Karen's mouth betrayed her with a micro twitch. They walked back to the shrine with villagers flowing into the gaps their absence had made. Shien took a slow breath and looked at the bell as if checking it was still there. It was. It sat a little prouder, as bells do after remembering their name. Evening found them on a ridge above the village where the wind felt like the inside of a bell the moment after the clapper stops. The sunset peeled back clouds. Fields blinked as if water were waking them. Fireflies lit small, obnoxious arguments with the dark. Naruto sat with a canteen and the sensation that he could say the world seems even when his eyes were closed, and for once it didn't make him feel like an answer looking for a question. It felt like a responsibility that fit. Hinata lowered herself beside without warning him off his head and without assuming she was invited. They shared the piece of ground the way two people share a page, careful not to smudge the other's work. You put yourself between the Hush and Shien, she said. She didn't ask. She needed it more, he said, which had become less a line and more a reflex, which worried him in an abstract way he filed under later. You don't have to be thin everywhere to be thick where it counts, she said, eyes on the fields, voice all practical mercy. He smiled sideways. Working on taste. Good, she said, and the word landed as praise and a promise to hold him to it. Tenten sat with her back to a rock, sewing silk into strange shapes, muttering opinions about tension and load to the anchor in her lap as if to a lover who had Disa. P pointed her but whom she hadn't given up on. Karen leaned against a tree pretending not to lean, watching Xian's hands as the priestess poured tea and blessed it with the casual grace of someone habituated to being believed. Fate, Xian said, out of nowhere and entirely on purpose, is a contract. Contracts can be amended, especially if the parties stop lying to impress the gods. Karen snorted. That's the first priest who ever said that like she meant it. I mean many things I say, Xian replied. I am trying to improve the percentage. Tenten hissed when a knot misbehaved. You, she told the knot, and I are going to become a metaphor for boys I'm not dating if you keep this up. Leave me out of your craft problems, Naruto said. Then stop moving the air without warning. He FTED his palm and let a firefly take the offer to land and then keep not landing. Rude. Someone clapped without making a sound. Gojo stood where no path led, the night folding itself into his posture. He was smiling like he'd been watching for long enough to have opinions he would not share until he could get the maximum tease to wisdom ratio out of them. You're rounding your edges for them, he said to Naruto. And for once the teasing was an aftertaste, not the main course. Good. Edges cut. Rounds hold. Are you my geometry teacher now? Naruto asked. Always have been, Gojo said cheerfully. He looked at Hinata with frank appreciation of craft. You two share a good map. Keep doing that. Don't become me. I'm very bad at being anyone else. Hinata bowed slightly. We're practicing. Excellent. He flicked his blindfold with one finger and looked up. Also, you haven't looked up. Naruto did. At first the sky was the sky, a huge black bowl with stars stuck in it like pins through notes. Then he saw it. A red sliver near the horizon, thin as a paper cut, exactly where no moon should be and trying very hard not to be there. Karen swore in a dialect that had probably been illegal in 3 countries. Xian's hand found the bell rope inside her head and tightened. Tenten didn't look up. She felt the change in the tension of the world and adjusted her thread. Hinata's breath came in a soft, deliberate measure that matched Naruto's without needing to be told. What is it? Naruto asked. Gojo shrugged, which meant he knew and preferred not to say yet. An opinion trying to become a fact, he said. Someone is counting in a language the sky doesn't like. Satsuki, Xian said, thinking of the oracle whose name had fallen out of Kaisei's mouth like a vow he hadn't meant to say where gods could overhear. Probably, Gojo said, and someone above her, holding the ruler too tight. He tapped Naruto's chest with a knuckle, gentle. You've stopped trying to be everywhere. Now start letting elsewhere matter. Naruto didn't pretend he understood. He wasn't a poet tonight. He was a boy who had fought a hush and felt how much of himself he could leave in a village and still be whole. He looked at the red sliver again and felt the lazy, careful, mathematical hate in it. Okay, he said to the sky, smiling the way you do when you've chosen the hard thing in advance so it doesn't get to surprise you later. Let's count how many ways we can refuse to be counted. Gojo grinned like a church vandal at sunrise. Now you're talking. He vanished the way traffic vanishes when you hit the city at the wrong hour. All at once, leaving only the aftertaste of intentions. Xian poured tea. Hinata took a cup and handed it to Naruto without looking because she knew where his hand would be. Tenten tied the knot and it agreed to behave. Karen pretended not to shiver and took the tea and sipped it like a dare. The bell did not ring. It didn't need to. It had already done its job today. The night held the note for it. Down the hill, villagers slept through a piece they had purchased together. On the ridge, 4 young women and a boy who had decided to be the kind of wall that made cities possible watched a sliver of red crawl along a horizon that had opinions about numbers, and decided to have better ones. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Sand that cuts its maker. The road to Suna did not end so much as give up. Wind crawled across beige like gossip. Heat made glass out of the air. Naruto walked with his jacket open and his sleeves rolled in the easy posture of someone who had learned to let the world touch him when it meant no harm, and ask it to stop when it did. The dunes peeled back to reveal walls the color of old bones. Suna's gate was 2 slabs of shade. Guards in T. And turbans watched with the polite suspicion of desert people who have learned that travelers import more than trade. Naruto lifted a hand. The air around the gate tightened as a dust devil tried to show off. It collapsed into a sulk before it could become a problem. A woman on the parapet snapped a fan open like a verdict. Wind went from nuisance to architecture, 3 strokes of laminar sweep de. She pared the air clean above the gate and let the guards breathe. The woman looked down, smirking already. Blonde hair pulled high to take advantage of wind. Eyes green in the way of things grown without water. Naruto Uzumaki, she said. Voice carrying just enough to make people pretend they weren't listening. You bring a storm or just borrow them. Tamari of the sand, Naruto returned, amused. I return what I borrow. Her fan closed with a click that said the test had begun. Try not to waste our time. Tenten nudged Naruto with her elbow. She's my favorite already, she murmured, delighted. Hinata's mouth tilted. Karen folded her arms, measuring Tamari the way a wolf measures another wolf, by the clean economy of her posture. Inside, Suna smelled like shaded stone and cumin and metal. Streets ran like lines drawn by a careful wrist. Children made games of sand. Vendors sold wind charms that were really excuses to talk. Tamari walked at Naruto's pace, which was to say she made her own and trusted him to keep up. He did. At noon, council, she said. They'll want to know why Konoha sends a boy whose name comes attached to weather reports and bad decisions. Naruto scratched his cheek. You could tell them. I like bells. Also I don't enjoy seeing civilians die. That will make 2 of us in the room, she said dryly. Good odds, he said. She didn't smile, exactly. The line of her mouth changed shape in a way that admitted the possibility later. An old man shouted in a tight alley and dropped a crate. The crate did not break because it never quite reached the ground. It hung, embarrassed, in the piece of air Naruto made for clumsy boxes. Tamari saw it and didn't comment. She adjusted her fan as if the wind-blown grit had been about to stab someone and she'd casually disinherited it. You do that without thinking, she said after 3 turns, and a vendor who took ukiyo-ikalm advantage of tourists, and you don't make it artless. That's dangerous. Working on taste, Naruto said. Good, she said, and the word sounded like a leather strap you hang a tool with. The council chamber was a circle cut out of heat. Ropes of shade hung from a skylight and made the GHT step carefully across a sandstone floor. 3 elders sat with the stillness of old cactus. Baki stood just behind Tamari, a scar across his face like an unambiguous sentence. Tamari opened with a short bow and a shorter introduction that was really a warning. Konoha sends help. We didn't ask. I invited it. Because of the bells. An elder asked, one eyebrow doing the budget. Because of the people who are making bells forget how to be bells, Naruto said, and put the captured null charm on the table in a seal-lined ring. Tenten unrolled without a flourish. Because they're counting your air like it's theirs. Baki glanced at the charm and didn't spit because he was too well trained. We've seen these. Then you know the taste, Naruto said, and met his gaze level. My team blocks it. Your wind core can keep it honest. We need a joint patrol on the east quarter. Intel says a test lattice will be deployed at dusk. Civilians will be in the way. One of the elders bristled the old way. You presume to give orders in our house. Tamari lifted her fan 2 inches. The elder shut up with the practiced patience of men who have grandchildren they love and stomachs that no longer wish to argue about banners. She looked at Naruto, not at his words but at the fact he'd placed them on the table like a map instead of a challenge. What's your end state? She asked. People go home, he said. Your city doesn't bleed, and the people who brought rulers to our sands leave with fewer fingers. Tamari considered the tone, considered his team, considered her wind core and their habit of doing exactly as asked provided you proved you'd thought farther than they had. She nodded. Keigo's squad, the East Quarter. I'll lead them. You put your taste where it breaks fewer things. Deal, Naruto said. Don't flirt with my chain of command, Baki muttered to Tamari without heat. It started it, she said. They split to work. Tenten found an artisan guild, half smithy, half choir, that's C. Old stamp anchors in Suna's script in an hour if she entertained them for 45 minutes with arguments about load. Hinata walked the wall. The guard captain stopped her out of habit and then let Her past because his eyes reminded him that some people make the city breathe better when they're near. Karen toured the infirmary and suffered for 10 minutes before commandeering a shelf, a ledger, and a lazy clerk's morning. Naruto paced roofs. The air above Suna had seams he liked. Wind ran between alleys with dependable mischief. Children laughed with a note he recognized as future. He sat once, on a low dome of mudbrick that still held the sun in its back, and let the city touch him the way you let a dog sniff your hand if you want to be friends. At dusk, the East Quarter found its hour. Shops shuddered with the clap of tired fathers. A woman braided her daughter's hair with the alert patience of mothers everywhere. Keigo's wine squad rolled shoulders and tried to look like they didn't hope for exercises. Tamari arrived in a clean line of motion. She didn't stand in the center of her men. She stood where they could all see the fan and judged their movement by hers. She looked at Naruto, a question without words. He answered with a nod that put him where a spine should go. The Red Moon likes experiments, Tamari said, voice talking to her squad and the wall and the weather. We're going to ruin the lab. Wind had a direction for maybe half a second. It stopped. Not quiet. Stopped. The grains of sand in the alley air hung like a diagram. The last open stall's awning held a billow that didn't finish. A drop of sweat on Keigo's back refused to choose a path. Naruto looked up the street and saw the lattice arrive. Not one thing. 1,000 tiny insistences, each a girder in a cage the size of a city block. Air turned into thin panes of glass at odd angles. The seams weren't lines. They were the wrong kind of edges, the kind that tally rather than join. The sunset got stuck between them and bled wrong. People began to cut themselves on the world. A man walked into an invisible edge and sliced his palm as if air had become knife. A boy ran and met a corner that wasn't supposed to exist. His forehead bloomed red. A woman's shawl caught on nothing and tore, and she looked around for someone to be angry with and found geometry. Temari's fan snapped open. Winds, laminar. Her voice made order behave. Keigo's squad fell into the clean current she created and polished the air into sheets that wore no grit. Where laminar flow went, the floating dust didn't get to become projectiles. Hinata's hand found Naruto's sleeve. There. 2 fingers tapped a rhythm he had learned. 4 beats and a gap. That gap was the safe way through. He built it. Blue threaded the first gap. Not brute force, a suggestion. He uncounted the space inside a narrow corridor that curved around a bread stall and under a hanging lantern. The road showed itself only to people willing to trust how their feet felt. He placed Tenten's anchors at each bend. Civilians, Naruto called. He didn't shout for panic. He set his voice so that men with small children would hear him as ashore. Walk between the red ribbons. Do not touch the air outside them. Tenten had tied silk lengths to anchors and let them float in the corridor. They didn't flap. They simply existed in a world that kept Ying to be an abstract and remembered how to be a street any time the ribbons were near. Karen stood 30 feet back, palms out, chakra pouring not as a flood but in mean, exact pulses, like a metronome set to Naruto's breath. Each time his field thinned where a lattice seam tried to quantify him, her timing fattened it an instant before it could fail. She didn't smile. She looked like someone doing math with someone else's life and refusing to forgive herself for the variable. Temari's wind made a clean room around a knot of people frozen in the alley like deer in an accountant's nightmare. On my mark, she told them with the kind of patience that allows panic to be told what to do. 2 steps. Left. Good. Now 3. Breathe. Her fan wrote the wind into obedience. The glass dust parted. Like a curtain that had suddenly remembered it was fabric. Satsuki arrived without arriving. 1 frame of a walking woman where there had been none and then a second frame somewhere else. She had the posture of a sentence that believed it had been properly punctuated. Her hair was black without argument. Her eyes were bright with the joy of proof. Her kimono was the color of good blood in bad light. And on its hem small silver rulers had been embroidered with obscene precision. She stepped into a seam and let it kiss the sole of her geta and not cut. The lattice loved her. She had brought it flowers. Naruto Uzumaki, she said, as if she were naming a variable in a classroom she owned. I am Satsuki, the Red Moon Oracle. I grant mercy to those who will be measured. Hard pass, Naruto said. He walked where the ribbon said to And people followed him because following him led to conclusions like, I am alive and my child is also alive. Satsuki took in Temari's fan in the casual glance of a woman for whom equally skilled women are not threatening, merely interesting problems on a better day. Lady Temari, she said. Your wind is unquantized, untidy. My wind keeps people breathing, Temari said. Drawing the fan back and snapping it forward, the air under it slid into laminar sheets that wrapped a tottering grandfather and moved him as gently as a cart with good springs. I like them that way. Satsuki's smile sharpened. If the divine refuses to be measured, we will cut the yardstick into it, she said, voice pleased to repeat a creed that balanced nicely in the mouth. Bring a bigger yardstick, Naruto said lightly, and then, quieter, to Hinata, east face about to buckle. She was already moving, 18 steps, right hand forward edge, take it like a pulse. He did. Red swelled narrow and then narrower. A repulsion turned scalpel. He didn't aim at a foe. He aimed at the joint between two invisible panes where the lattice took pride in the angle it had made. The line he drew was a whisper. The joint unjoined. The block's east face, an unmarked wall of bad math, drooped like a sheet released from a clothesline. Satsuki watched with hungry delight. Ah, she breathed. He can cut himself thin. Good. I can also talk while saving lives, Naruto said, and kept speaking to the two kids under the awning. Take your mother's hand. Eyes on me. Yes, you. We're going to walk a line other people don't see, okay. I promise it is there. The world tried to make a liar of him. The lattice flexed with new angles. Invisible corners sharpened, impatient. Anchors. Tenton snapped. She hammered one into the seam Hinata pointed to. Her hammer hit nothing and still made the metallic dignity of a task properly done. The anchor bit into a gap between measured units and kept it from being measured. The corridor steadied. Satsuki reached into her sleeve and produced a charm that had the texture of law. She flicked it. It drifted like a snowflake toward Naruto's cheek. It wasn't fast. It didn't have to be. It had the confidence of a document signed by a judge who never went outside. Naruto stepped in. The inch of air at his skin where the world paused, infinity, met the charm. It did not stop. It negotiated. The charm gnawed through, counting the inch in slices, and for the first time since the bridge, Naruto felt the air kiss his skin hot. He let it, up to the point that would scar. Then he smiled as if to someone he liked a little and offered a different problem. Blue wrapped the charm's far edge and rotated it 3 degrees. The ink lost orientation. Its numbers stumbled. Its teeth chewed nonsense. It fell, tired, into his palm. Satsuki clapped, delighted, and the lattice made the sound for her. Thousands of tiny ticks along glass edges. You will make this worth doing. Good, Temari said. She flicked wind under the clap and turned it back into the sound of a child exhaling relief. Karen's voice came like pressure in the back of Naruto's neck, her chakra tuning to the rate at which he was bleeding his field into everyone else. You're thinning, she said through gritted teeth. You're generous. Don't be stupid. Microburst on my mark, Naruto said. 3 women who had retired from panic stepped into the corridor. He felt the lattice lean toward the softest among them. He opened his shield there and closed it elsewhere and then, at the exa court instant the seam would have kissed the crown of a child's head, Karen's chakra thumped into the field like a heartbeat. The kiss never arrived. Keigo's squad held the big picture. Where laminar wind flowed, the worst shards could not take aim. Temari's fan turned pressure into a floor. She did math with weather and expected the weather to be grateful. Satsuki crooked a finger. Panels of measure. D-air rose on either side of Naruto like blades unsheathing. They did not approach. They tightened the corridor. He could feel what she wanted. Not to kill him bluntly, but to make his infinite cushion choose a size. To count it into squares and take the ones that didn't fit. It's not an attack, Hinata said, breath quick, pupils large as she mapped stress. It's a sizing. People do that, Naruto said. I don't let them either. He stepped where the corridor insisted and let Satsuki's lattice meet him. He felt the impulse of counting and answered with a different habit. He refused to ratify it. He didn't push the walls away. He accepted them and then made them incommensurate to themselves. The panels disagreed. 3 glass-thin edges kissed each other and found they were not the same kind of straight. The disagreement broke one of them into gleaming sand. Satsuki watched like a teacher surprised to enjoy being wrong. That will not scale, she warned, tone almost kindly. You cannot do it everywhere. I don't need to, Naruto said. He looked at the old woman who had stopped to adjust her sandal. I only need to do it where she is. Satsuki's gaze flicked to the woman. She looked back at Naruto. And in the angle of her head was something like respect, made bitter by purpose. If you were a god, she said almost wistful, you would be unbearable. Lucky for everybody, Tenten said, he has friends. The lattice learned. It began to drop thin slats like guillotines in a rhythm that matched footsteps. The city block turned into a metronome for murder. Naruto's field could go wide or deep, never both. He opened to shield 4 and felt 6 more asked to be held. Taste as choosing. He needed a line that would hold back an hour of problems in a second. He took a breath. He will. Remember later and look back at as a decision. Everyone down, he said, and his voice went flat in a way that meant even people who did not understand orders suddenly did. Temari, keep the air clean and still. Hinata, mark the spine. Tenten, anchors every 2 paces. Karen, steady me on the exhale. Hinata's fingers tapped. A path that a monk would recognize as a prayer for edges. She saw the S. Treats not as streets but as a line through weak joints the lattice didn't want to admit it had. Tenten placed anchors so fast they seemed inevitable, each one a nail into a seam the world had not noticed until she called it out. Temari brought wind up and then down until the whole block's air lay like a mirror, no turbulence, no wandering grit. Karen pressed her palm between Naruto's shoulder blade. And timed her chakra to his breath without needing him to tell her what it was. Satsuki understood a half-second before he moved. Don't, she said, not in fear. In hunger. Naruto set his thumb and forefinger together as if to pluck a hair. He raised his hand and lowered it. The air in front of him curved into a line that wasn't a line so much as a gentle fact. Not explosion, not shove. A merging of opposite invitations, blue pulling, red pushing, threaded until the contradictions met and loved each other and, for one merciful heartbeat, agreed to erase what lay strictly on that path and nothing else. Hollow purple hummed. No color. No drama. The line lanced forward at knee-height through sand and air and glass edges alike. Where it passed, the lattice ceased to be a lattice, not shattered, but unmade as if the maker had shaken her head and taken it back before the ink dried. A hallway opened. Exactly wide enough for 3 abreast. Exactly tall enough for a carrying father, from the Brea D stall at the near corner to the safe square at the far. For a heartbeat, Suna had a street only Naruto could have drawn. He held it. The cost came like heat at the base of his skull, like the scent of iron under his tongue. He measured not power but precision. How long could he keep this so narrow it did no harm to walls or banners or cats? Go, he said, and they went. It wasn't careful anymore. It was efficient. People poured down the corridor like river through a canyon, the kind of water that remembers flood myths and does not repeat them. Temari's wind kept the air in the hall sterile. Hinata walked backward at the rear. Palms out, eyes bright, slapping gentle fist into seams that tried to stitch themselves back together. Tenten's anchors hummed. She could feel them, each one a fingertip on a thread. Karen fed Naruto tiny notes of chakra at the exact microsecond his control would have smudged. Satsuki took 3 light steps along the lattice, cat-curious, and stopped at the edge of the purple's path. She lifted a hand toward it with idiot-brave scientific interest. Don't, Temari advised conversationally. Satsuki's fingers paused a millimeter from the absence. She smiled without showing teeth, in appreciation. He threads the erasure, she said. He refuses waste. Oh, Null would love him if he were not so disobedient. The last of the civilians spilled out into the safe square. The lattice complained in a sound only instruments should make. Naruto let purple go and it vanished as if it had never been. He swayed. Karen's hand was already there, nails biting just hard out to interrupt the thought that would have taken him to the ground. Sit, she snapped. He didn't, because he was busy. The lattice inhaled. Panels rose like the beginnings of a dome. Satsuki looked up, delighted and suspicious. We're done, she told it, and it listened. She stepped down off her seam and into ordinary air like someone wading out of a pool. A successful test, she announced to no one and everyone. The lattice holds under stress, but not under taste. Her eyes met Naruto's. My lord will be pleased to see it cut. She turned. Not fleeing, not attacking, a movement that declared that she belonged to the next stage already. Temari half-stepped and then stopped, fan lowered, instincts fighting the order of a day that already had enough knives. Next time, Naruto said. Satsuki inclined her head, a courtly motion from a woman married to a concept. There is always a next measurement, she said, and left. The lattice broke apart into glitter that decided to be sand again and lay down. People made the sounds people make when they survive. Laughter that sounds like weeping's cousin, scolding that agrees to be a hug, angry jokes about rulers and idiots. Keigo sagged and then straightened and pretended he hadn't. Hinata rolled her shoulders and exhaled slowly. Tenten leaned her head against a warm wall and grinned like a woman who had gotten away with a small theft of physics. Naruto let his knees have their opinions. He sat on a stoop. Karen pressed a wrapped canteen into his hand with brusque compassion. You bled a kind of stupid I can't put back in with a bite, she said. Drink. Breathe. Stop being heroic for 6 seconds. 3. He bargained, and obeyed anyway. The water tasted like sand and survival. Temari came to stand in front of him. She didn't offer a hand. She rested the end of her fan on the ground and leaned on it, studying him the way you study a map you've decided not to ignore. You threaded a god's knife and didn't cut the drapes, she said. That's rare. I like drapes, Naruto said, a little hoarse. You like people, she corrected, unbothered by how earnest that sounded in a room that had almost become a problem of angles. That's rarer, Karen snorted. Don't reward him. He'll adopt 3 more cities. Good, Temari said. We have extra. She angled her head toward the roofline. Walk. It wasn't a request. It was a choice that expected a good answer. They went up the external stairs a brick mason had left for rescue crews and stubborn teenagers. The roofline was a low museum of air. Chimneys, kettle vents, solar shade cloth. Sunset had given up and the first sensible stars had reported for work. The city moved below with a new caution that would become bragging tomorrow. Temari stood with her hands at the small of her back, elbows crooked. Fan closed and resting against her hip like a pet you bring to market to properly intimidate prices. She didn't face him. She let him stand beside her so the conversation would go well. You scare my counsel, she said. Do I scare you? She took her time. No, you make me wonder about logistics. He laughed, surprised. That might be worse. Maybe, she said, but it's useful. Your field works like wind if wind were a gentleman. If we coordinate, I can lift grit before it test cuts you and you can raise a wall that doesn't make my gusts turbulent. We will draw routes for civilians and for me. Different ones, so I can use pressure where it does the most work without starving your trick. Call it infinity, he said. It's a bad name. A good joke. Your jokes are knives. She turned, finally, to look at him. Don't dull them on pride. He swallowed part of a retort he didn't mean, because she wasn't flirting with his ego, she was caring for hers. I'd like to win without making you accommodate me, he said, simply. I'd like to win without bleeding for someone else's learning curve. They stood like that, candid and competent. Rooftops make honesty easier. It's strange, she said after a minute. I misjudged you twice today. I thought you'd grandstand and you didn't. I thought you'd be careless with civilians and you were careful like a craftsman. I misjudged you once, he admitted. I thought you'd argue politics when people were cutting themselves on air. I will tomorrow, she said, a brief grin. Tonight I am in debt. He shook his head. We are even. Wrong, she said, more softly than her voice usually allowed. That corridor you made, that was a promise to a city that does not trust promises. She looked away so he wouldn't have to meet her eyes for the next part. I liked you before I respected you. That's a liability. I'm correcting it. He felt the heat of that like standing up quickly. He ground his heel against the roof and watched 2 men argue about whose tea stall had better mint. I'm afraid of liking people I can't always protect, he said, factual, not fishing. She considered him like weather. Then don't, she said, equally factual. Like the people who walk with you. And make them good enough to like back. And if I fail, then I yell, she said. And build a plan where yelling is a resource. He smiled with his mouth more than his eyes. I can work with that. Below, Hinata paused in a street lamp's pool and looked up. She saw their silhouettes, registered the comfortable angles and did not translate them into dets or cuts. She turned and kept walking with Tenten at her shoulder, Tenten complaining about sand in the hinges of her anchors like someone who loved their work and hated grit. Hinata found Naruto later on the roof edge. Temari gone to manage her men. She took the spot Temari had left without marking territory or erasing it. He gave her half an apology with his shoulders. She gave him the other half back with a nod. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. He reached to take the blindfold out of his pocket and stopped. He set it back. He watched the stars instead, 6 at a time, and let the city breathe against his field without being edited. A low vibration hummed through the stone under his feet, the kind that travels through clever engineering faster than streets. He went still. Hinata's hand was already on his wrist, her Byakugan turned toward the horizon. Tenten's voice came from the parapet like a thrown knife. Signal. In the distance, beyond the walls where dunes make mountains out of little deaths, the sand glowed red. Not fire. Not lava. A grid laid over the desert like a net thrown by a giant who had lost patience. It hummed numbers he didn't like. On the rim of the world the thin red sliver they'd seen near the shrine had fattened. It cut a line through stars that believed themselves permanent. Satsuki's voice carried up a mile of heat in a ton. That should never have traveled that far. Content scientist, pleased at an experiment's curve. The lattice took, she called, small and terrible for being genuinely happy. My lord will be pleased. A shadow moved behind the red, large in the way of ideas that precede bodies. It bent the stars slightly, like a coin under a tablecloth. Naruto breathed in. The breath felt like a man at the lip of a pool looking at his reflection and deciding to enter without breaking it. He put his hand on the parapet and the stone warmed. Okay, he said to his team, to a city, to a woman with a fan and a PR. Eastes with a bell and a girl with chains who pretended not to care and a friend whose eyes riffled veins like prayer. They're cutting their yardstick into us. We're going to make them measure the right things. Temari's steps came up the stair behind them, decisive. She took her place, the fan leaning on her shoulder. Plan, she said. Steal their spine, Naruto said. Then we can talk. The desert hummed with distant math. Soon as roofs collected the breath of people deciding not to be an experiment. Above them, the red slice of moon watched like a tally mark with bad intentions. Naruto Lee, FTED his palm and let a tiny bit of purple hum along the parapet, just enough to make the stone remember it could be a knife when needed and a cradle when not. He grinned, tired and more sure than he had any right to be. Let's make tasteful trouble. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The number after infinity. Night pulled its scarf tight around Suna and pretended the heat wasn't still clinging to the stone. From the roof, the desert looked like someone had combed it with a god's fingers. Far out where dunes made a low skyline, a net of red lines hummed. No sound, just the kind of vibration you feel in your teeth when a room has bad lighting. The slice of red at the horizon had fattened into a paper-thin moon that shouldn't exist and insisted anyway. Naruto, Hinata, Tenten, Karen, and Temari crouched behind a low parapet while wind scuffed grit along the coping and tried to be useful about it. Not a duel, Naruto said, checking each face. Heist first, fight if we must. Temari flipped her fan, closed and tapped it lightly against his shoulder blade. Define. Must. When the count reaches us, Naruto said, half to her, half to the red grid. When the world tells us how many steps we are AP. Art and we forget we don't have to agree. Hinata touched 2 fingers to Naruto's forearm, a habit now, their placeholder for a whole paragraph. Tenten hooked silk around the fan's pivot and smiled at its balance. Karen breathed out through her nose, hands loose at her sides until they weren't. Shion waited at the inner gate, white sleeves catching the heat that hadn't gone. She had pressed talisman's into the fingers of children earlier with a priest's blasé practical affection, and now she held a scroll that smelled like salt, cedar, and the word number. Sanctum is under the dunes, Temari said. The red moon's lattice is drawing caravans east to roadless sand. Baki's scouts followed it until the air argued and turned back with their ears bleeding. Null moved in a prefabricated temple 3 days ago. It hums when the stars do. Prefabricated temple, Tenten murmured, fascinated and offended. Like buying faith flat-packed. We're going to return it with missing parts, Naruto said, and tea. He grin that followed had edges and warmth in equal measure. They left Suna by a maintenance gate. Temari's men pretended not to notice. The desert at night is a shy thing. It watches, it offers very little and expects you to respect that. Their footsteps ghosted. Jackals put their thoughts on hold until the humans were gone. Even before they reached the grid, the sand stiffened under Naruto's soles. Not hard, quantized. His stride adjusted by habit, and the wrongness of that made him slow. The space between his heel and the next placement felt numbered. The red lattice stretched overhead like a diagram of how distance should behave if distance were a bureaucrat. Karen muttered. This place tastes like rulers. Hinata's eyes went pale and wide. Left, she said, tapping twice. There, seam. If we step on the edges they'll sharpen. Anchors at the seam, Tenten said, and the nail bit into nothing and held something anyway, because it believed Naruto when he told it where the seam lived. Silk ghosted out in the dark. A dull red ribbon in the red moon's light. They walked in silence, because speaking here felt like agreeing to be counted out loud. Naruto kept infinity low to his skin. It ticked and pushed back in tiny increments whenever the lattice tried to apportion it. The sanctum rose without rising, a set of angles inside a dune, the kind of structure you see only when it wants you. Its walls were red in the dignified way blood goes when it becomes flag. The entry was a fold. It waited to be unfolded by the correct hand. Shion knelt, breath pacing prayer. She set her palm on the sand and pushed her barrier into the threshold the way you push light through paper, no force, all insistence. The fold sighed open. The smell that came out was white, clean, and startled. Like a hospital that had never held people. After you, Temari told Naruto with the courtesy of an executioner lending his whetstone. He went. The air changed at his wrist. The shallow taste of Kori. Doors that had never been dusty and never will. Hallways pressed toward one large room as if they'd always meant to funnel inconvenient phenomena into a manageable box. It was a temple if a temple were. Designed by a man who believed you shouldn't surprise the gods. Everything was measured. Steps equidistant, lines straight as intent, lamplight not flicker but glow by decree. The walls leaned inward by a hair, mad with perfection. At the center, a lattice cylinder rose like an organ pipe and sang without singing. Inside it, an object turned. It was small enough to hold. It was large enough to be a threat to a sky. A core of smooth facets that registered not in sight but in consequence. Where it rotated, the distances around it snapped into right angles, and the six of them felt instantly furt. Her from each other than their eyes said. That's our spine, Naruto breathed. Counting core. If we take it, the field loses its metronome. Convenient, said a gentle voice. Satsuki stepped from behind the pipe as if appearing were a habit she had trained to sound like good manners. She wore white in here, not red, a long coat sewn so precisely the stitches apologized for the folds they made. Kaisei stood just behind, eyes sober. A string of null charms like dark paper prayer between his fingers. You brought your wind, Satsuki said to Temari, admiring. And your bell, to Shion, with an archivist's envy. And an Uzumaki with chain and teeth. And another with taste. Two with taste, Tenten said, insulted on principle. Satsuki's eyes warmed. 3, then, she turned back to Naruto. My lord would see you counted. It will be cleaner than this. A ripple passed through walls that should not have rippled. The angle of the lamps changed by a degree. The breath in Naruto's mouth counted itself. In 4, out 4. The numbers forced onto it by a field expanding. Sand sifted out of the ceiling in tidy cardinal directions. The floor ticked. The sky bent and came in through a place no architecture included. The room darkened and clarified in the same instant, a contradiction that only measurements can get away with. It grew a step pattern, impossible to ignore once seen. Each time Naruto moved, head, hand, he felt invisible treads under the movement, as if the world had put stairs between him and everything else. Amatsu stepped into those stairs. He wasn't large. That was somehow worse. Tall, yes, and straight. And not wearing anything as gauche as armor. Hair the color of unlit ash. Eyes that held that red slice from the horizon as a pupil. Clothes that weren't clothes, an eyed. Of white and black with no seams because walls should not be visible. The desert had bent when he took his last step outside, the room didn't bend. It unfolded to match him. Measurement is mercy, he said without mouth. The words arrived as numbers that agreed to act like sound. Naruto let infinity settle around his skin like a coat he didn't tug on yet. Mercy for whom? He asked, naturally speaking like a person who refused to let the conversation be a ledger. For all, Amatsu said amiably. When the endless becomes steps, we can climb it. He lifted a finger. The air at Naruto's cheek counted the inch in slices. Infinity's smooth paws broke into staircase, each stair a known gap. The old, easy cushion rushed to find shape and found itself cut into shells. It still held. It would not hold forever. You are not a god. Amatsu told him, tone not unkind. You are a rounding error we can center. Try, Naruto said, and Satsuki made a small, satisfied sound because it was both impertinent and correct. The sanctum reconfigured while no one moved. Distances altered. Temari felt the hull behind them step away by 3 precise paces. Her wind bumped against the new edges and shaved itself modest rather than scrape. Karen tasted Naruto's chakra blur as if someone had smeared a hand across the numbers she relied on. Hinata's sight bit into a seam and found the capillaries of the field like thin clear fish. Identical and terrible, Xian's barrier tried to stack itself neatly and she slapped it kindly. No, she told it, and reminded it of why it had been made, not to fit around something, but to let the people inside it breathe. Naruto put his hand down and stopped pretending the plan began later. Heist, he said, and Temari grinned because the word tasted like a fan you pretend isn't a sword. They moved, not refuges, not charges, assignments that fit like old tools in new hands. Tenten went for the core. Not straight. Tenten never does straight, but denial and diagonal, Utting anchors only where the field would least expect nails. Each one bit into the seam between steps and wrung itself quietly, a hum she could feel through the silk between her fingers. Silk lines ran from anchor to anchor. The core tried to make them align to its counting. They refused by virtue of being made with love. Karen ran alongside her, chains slithering out in fine red arcs. The chain inks kissed the edges of the counting field and found they tasted like salt and arrogant geometry. She hooked them anyway, not to the core but to the space around it, changing how the room could approach it. Her teeth grit and she managed her chakra like a miser yelling at himself to spend. Temari planted her feet and used the whole building as a fan. 3 strokes out, 2 in, 1 holding position. She did not fight the field. She made wind into a metronome out of step, 1 beat off. It nagged at the counting rhythm the way a clapper out of time ruins a bell choir. The field hesitated in micropauses, which is exactly the size good plans require. Xian paced the thresholds of the room and wrote a prayer along the baseboards. It wasn't calligraphy, it was carpentry in ink. Words that say which way is in and which is out. Each stroke widened the meaning of, inside us, until the temple found itself unsure how to exclude the people at its heart. Hinata stayed on Naruto's right where he never had to look to be sure. Her eyes were full of thin lines no one had taught her to read, she read them anyway. 2 seams there, she whispered. Pulse here to dull, there to sharpen. When he moves, he doesn't move. He makes us move around him. Good, Naruto said, not in approval, in knowledge gained. He stepped forward into the staircase of air and made his foot fall between steps. Amatsu raised his palm and the world clicked. The floor accepted an indexing. 1, 2, 3. Infinity canted, losing roundness for momentary angles, and for the first time since Gojo had flicked a chopstick at his nose. Naruto felt the air kiss his skin as if to measure curvature. He didn't panic. He smiled, impatient and kind. Taste, he told himself. Use taste. He let infinity go. He did it on purpose. The coat fell from his shoulders. The tiny paws at his skin released like held breath. The room reached for his cheek with the thrill of a convert who has finally convinced the apostate. Amatsu's eyes brightened. Satsuki's hand twitched as if to catch a head that would fall. Hinata moved. She didn't punch. She placed gentle fist into a seam in the air and the seam had never been touched by kindness, so it recoiled, appalled. Her palm sank a fraction and the field's thread there bent. Amatsu's perfect index clicked one bead out. He blinked the way a novice blinks when a bead slips and the whole rosary knows. Now, Naruto said, and the word stood upright and did a job. Blue grabbed the moment's slack and waited, because Blue knows that a pull only matters when the knot is loose. Red kissed the opposite edge of reality and pushed. The contradiction ran between them and he stepped through the argument faster than the count could number. He went for Satsuki, not for Amatsu. Don't lie to yourself, he said to her as they met along a seam, his mouth grinning and his eyes not. You were curious, not faithful. She laughed, delighted, furious at herself, and threw a charm that shouldn't have had time to exist. He caught it by the corner and pressed it gently against her shoulder, pinning it to her coat and making it anchor the field to her instead of to the room. She startled as time clasped her wrist. He left her there, not harmed, just held by the numbers she had written. Kaisei moved to cut Naruto off with polite competence. Temari's wind decided his coat would billow then, just then, he grabbed it and lost a beat. Hinata's finger stopped his elbow's argument with air. Tenten's silk whispered between his feet and the floor and requested he take a small step to the left. He did, puzzled, and a chain looped him neatly without bruising him or his pride. Hire craftsman, get art, Tenten sang under her breath. Keep up, darling. Amatsu watched with an attention that would have ruined lesser men. He took one step forward and the room grew stairs between them again. Naruto felt the inches arrive in tidy columns. The instinct to lift infinity at his skin was loud and wrong. He ignored it. He took the stairs two at a time by stepping where they weren't finished yet. I understand you, Amatsu offered, curious as a child watching a bug consider a quill. You are a refusal. I am a teacher, Naruto said, and opened his domain. The temple knew domains. It had rooms within rooms. It understood shelves. It anticipated horror. Empty information poured into skulls until panic disables. Naruto gave it neither. The air around him turned into a rectangular kindness that became a street, then a practice hall, then the place in the shrine where he and Shion had coaxed sound back into the bell. It wasn't big. It didn't have to be. It was clear. Edges softened at just the right distance. Corners were where you could trust them. There were lines on the floor with chalk marks kids make when they play. You stay here. I'll stay here, and the ceilings were low enough to prevent the night from swallowing small voices. Names hung in the air, not shining, not ballots, whispered and listened to. Hinata. Tenten, Karen, Tamari, Shion, Zabuza, grudging, Haku, kind against orders. The boy in the exam hall whose foot stopped jittering when a paper fell the right way. Tenten's favorite anchor, a sparrow who hadn't died. Bells. Amatsu stopped. His field wanted to count. Naruto's room refused the premise. You cannot count a promise, it is either kept or not. Unlimited void. Gojo had called his torture-perfect domain. This wasn't that. Naruto didn't spill infinity, he drew margins. He let Amatsu see everything that mattered here and nothing else. He flooded him not with informat, ion but with context. All the pale lines of cause and effect, the choices that made the room, where they began in hands and ended in breath. If Amatsu's field tried to impose steps, it found the steps already annotated with chalk. Breathe. Move, stop, let her speak. Amatsu tilted his head, very slightly. He didn't anger. He didn't fear. He computed and looked up from under the lid of a problem that would not reduce. Names are not numbers, he admitted, and the word admitted was as close to reverence as that voice could manage. Behind them, Tenten reached the core and held her breath to keep from narrating. Up close it was worse, an object pretending to be a concept pretending not to be one. Her anchors bowed under its mere idea. She wove silk through space as if lacing a boot on a girl who would run. The boot did not want to fit, she made it want to by loving the shape and not the idea. Karen's chains kissed two facets and flinched. She swore in a language that preferred precise vowels. Naruto's domain brushed the chain with an unspoken "you are doing well" and the links warmed, steadied. She wrapped the chain not around the core but through the gap between two measured planes and F. Found there a rare thing, an edge the field had forgotten to think about. Now, she said, low, and Tenten drove two anchor caps home with a small, satisfying metal complaint. The core's spin slowed by a thought. It noticed the thought. It tried to correct, countertick, Tamari snapped, and her wind made a pulse at a frequency the field hated, half a beat off the grid. It skated along laminar edges, gently destructive. The lights in the sanctum pulsed on the wrong second and did not like it. Xian knelt and wrote the last word of her prayer under the door. It was not a name for God. It was the boring name for a human threshold. The sanctum tried to push it out of the sentence the way a proof shoves contradictions into a footnote. Xian refused. The threshold stood. Everything inside the temple became inside the room. And Naruto's domain smiled at the hospitality and included it. Satsuki pulled the charm off her shoulder and let it fall. Her hand trembled. She glanced at Kaisei bound by chain and silk in his own good sense. She could have run. She didn't. She watched Naruto and then Amatsu, and her smile turned into an expression no creed should recognize, hunger to be wrong in a way that keeps people alive. Amatsu stepped into Naruto's room. The field pressed against the chalk lines not with weight but with manner. The stairs under movements refused to be put down here. He could move, but he had to obey certain rules, and the first rule was the most offensive: touch may not precede consent. You cannot hold this, Amatsu said. It is noisy. That's fine, Naruto said. It's ours. The field flared. Naruto let the domain recede until it fitted exactly. Not a bludgeon, a measuring cup for compassion. Take it, he said, and the mission remembered itself. Tenten grunted. With effort as the last anchor found purchase. Karen's hands had gone white. Chakra chewed at her bones where chains left them. Temari's breath ran steady. Her eyes were bright and alive with the way pressure obeyed when asked correctly. Xian's barrier thickened just enough over one boy's head. She would not lie later and say she hadn't thought of that boy specifically when she wrote the word. Ikor's spin faltered on a human count. 3. Naruto didn't have time to make a speech or a pose look good. He moved. Infinity came back to his skin only where he needed it. A glove over the hand he used to lift something heavy by shape. Not by weight. Blue wrapped the two anchors like he was gathering up a quilt. Red pressed the room away just enough to keep the field from closing its teeth. Hinata, he said, and didn't have to say which seam, but he said it anyway because talking is also commitment. Here, she struck. Not to break. Her palm a whisper into the seam that held the field's idea of equilibrium. It wasn't chakra exhaustion. It wasn't pain. It was the shock of a perfect thought tripping on compassion. The inches between people shivered. Now, Naruto told himself, and lifted. The counting core resisted like a habit. Then it came loose a finger's width. Amatsu was already there. He did not raise a hand. He enforced an axiom. The field put stairs in Naruto's wrist, construct-ing a metaphor of tendons into steps and making the upward motion require counting. Naruto's domain, still open, made the stairs polite. Polite is not helpless. He refused to set foot on the first step and moved anyway. The core rose by a breath. He felt the numbers chafe his skin and become hot under the wrist wrap. He did not complain. Hard way, he said through his teeth. Best way, Karen sighed. The way only someone who hates dying but hates the other option more can. Tamari braced. If we move it, the lattice outside will sag, she said. Satsuki will retreat with a note. The dunes will unbrid. Then we move it, Naruto said. Grinning because pride has uses if you point it outward. The core cleared the anchors and suddenly weight had a say. Tenten was there with silk already arranged. Like a sling she had invented 4 minutes ago and then perfected in 3. Naruto laid the core into it. The field bucked and the sling flexed and remembered it wasn't a rope, it was intention. It held. Alarms should have bellowed. They stuttered, then remembered Xian's threshold. The sanctum chose to be inside the room where bells ring. No alarm can speak authoritatively where bells have jurisdiction. Amatsu reached again, and this time he pushed toward poor options. He counted the distance between Naruto and the door to 1, then 2, then 20, then 1, an inconsistent disaster that denies human attention. People get lost if you bear that on your shoulders. Naruto dropped infinity. He did it on purpose again. The field took him in a clean joy. It chappened him and reached to tuck him into acceptable parameters. Amatsu smiled with very small satisfaction. That was when Naruto was exactly where he had planned to be. Hinata, he said, breath-grazing laugh, make the wrong thing soft. She did. Gentle fist in a seam. Another. She didn't strike hard, she struck honest. The field staggered. Amatsu's count missed a beat. Temari's wind hit that beat like the heel of a drummer's hand and held it off time. Tenten heaved, elegant swear words informing the silk what it would become. Karen fought herself to steal 3 seconds of chakra she would have preferred to hoard and shoved it into Naruto's lattice where it was thinnest. Shion put 2 fingers to the floor and the door understood it was time to leave. Go, Naruto told the extraordinary set of people who had believed a plan was a promise. They went. Satsuki didn't. She lingered 1 step away from decision. Kaisei glared at the beautifully tied bow around his wrists and came to peace with living through the day. Amatsu did not fight with claws or spears. He enforced counts. The corridor from sanctum to threshold broke into slices like a child's paper chain. Every slice tried to demand respect as a unit distance and refused to join hands with its neighbors. Naruto did not command the corridor to be one piece. He loaned it a song. Tamari, he said, metronome. Her wind put a beat into air. Another, displaced by a fraction. The steps tricked themselves. They tried to fit the wrong song and stumbled, obligingly. They joined to feel less ridiculous. Blue, Naruto hissed, and allowed himself the smallest flamboyance. The sling sailed with the core and found each step already resolving into runway. Satsuki, he said, without looking. Decide. Her shoulder settled down 1 degree. Her mouth did not smile. Kaisei, call the retreat, she said. He looked at her the way men look when they love a machine and realize they love a person's decision more and hate that fact. He tapped 3, 2, 1 in the air with his fingers. The paper soldiers hidden in the dunes that counted for nulls will collapse their lattice. The red grid dimmed. The desert took a breath and tasted like itself. Far off, some lamplighter standing in a caravan's gap said, "Huh," aloud. "Get it out," Tenten said, urgent and giddy. "Get it out and we can talk about closing a door no one will open again in polite society." The cord, or spilled them into desert that had unlearned how to wear netting. Stars adjusted. Wind remembered to be petty. The counting hung on a beat too long and slackened like a cheap watch in July. Amatsu stepped after them. In open air he looked less dreamy. The desert gives no weight to assertions. He stopped on the threshold because Shion's last word held. It wasn't an attack, it was a verb. Stay. It did not apply to gods who have forgotten how to be invited. It applied to rooms. The room obeyed. Amatsu was still inside it. He lifted his gaze to Naruto as if to ask whether this was a victory, a delay, or both. You cannot keep what you cannot define, he said. The core is not for your shelves. It's for mine, Tenten muttered, possessive in a way only a maker can be. It's not for anyone's shelf, Naruto said, and that gentled Satsuki's shoulders because she had been ready to hate him efficiently. It's going back to the part of the world in charge of rocks. They're better at refusing invitations. Amatsu tried a different argument. Without count, you make chaos. Without count, Naruto said, we make room. He raised his hand. Not high, not theatrical. A smooth line drawn at KNUC. Clahate as if to silence a noisy thought. Hollow purple born small, no larger than a thread, met the desert's heat, crossed the gap between threshold and night, and sang a single note only he could hear. He did not aim for Amatsu. He aimed through the sanctum's spine. The line of erasure ran from the edge of Shion's threshold to the pipe around the core's cradle to the far wall where numbers go. To taste for the first time and discover they are not the only way to order anything. It didn't make a hole. It untied a knot. The temple unfolded like origami given back its paper. The ceiling returned to being dusk. The floor decided to be sand. The walls sighed, accepted that they had been angles without permission, and lay down. Amatsu stood where the room had been and briefly had no frame. He did not fall. He recalculated. Gods are not rope. You cannot cut them and expect them to realize they are shorter. He looked at the place where the core had been and at the people not being measured and at Satsuki, who had not run. Fascinating, he said with a scientist's honesty, which, from him, was briefly human. You count different things. You will be interesting to kill later. Or we could keep talking, Naruto suggested. Because he never knows when he's not supposed to ask for good outcomes. Later, Amatsu repeated. The red slice on the horizon thinned as if hearing its own name spoken backward. He stepped. And the step did not tick. It simply was. The night breathed out like a village after a storm. Silence came in the honest kind. Then it filled up with babble because Karen begged. And swearing about shoulder ligaments, and Tenten hugged the core with her whole narrative, and Temari laughed once, like a man who's rolled a boulder and found it had been waiting to move anyway. Satsuki looked at her hands. Kaisei looked at Naruto. You will wreck our budget, Kaisei said, with the first ghost of humor he'd allowed out of his posture. Naruto passed him a paper strip. Not a charm. A receipt. You owe me 1 bell's ring and 2 villagers returned to their families. Kaisei read it as if it were a contract he'd been forced to sign and found, to his surprise, to be to his advantage. Noted. Satsuki straightened. I can't take you to my lord, she said at last, which was the first treason anyone in Null had committed, with a smile. He would count me carefully and find my missing teeth. Keep your teeth, Temari said. You'll need them to snarl at councils. Shion put a palm over the core and winced like someone touching a stove to be sure it is off. We cannot keep this, she said gently. It's an argument we can't afford to host. I know a cliff, Temari said. I know a seal, Karen said. I know a prayer, Shion said. I know where to swing, Tenten said. I know when to stop, Hinata said. Naruto nodded. And I know we don't do it here. We do it where stone says no. They took the core into the desert as the net above them cratered into quiet. Gojo walked along, sighed for 3 seconds where none of them had ever looked to see a path, and popped something sweet in his mouth. You threaded purple like it had manners, he said, delighted. Look at you, teaching erasure to pick a lane. Naruto didn't look over. He grinned and shook his head. I had help. You finally believe that sentence, Gojo said, and the laugh he didn't let out sounded more like relief than triumph. He fell back the way clouds do when the wind remembers not to show off. They hiked until stone shouldered up out of sand and refused to be impressed. The cliff had survived a kingdom falling, then another. It had time. It didn't like company but suffered it if the company was polite. Tenten set her anchors in a circle, 12, then 13, because she is superstitious only when physics is judging. Karen unrolled seals that made Shion's eyebrows climb 1 notch. Ruthless, elegant, ill-advised. You wrote this drunk, Shion said, impressed. I write best when I have to apologize to myself later, Karen said. Temari's wind cleaned the air. Hinata marked a seam in the cliff face with her knuckle as if telling a doctor where to cut for least bleeding. Naruto placed the core on a slab and put his palm on its facet, offering it a sentence. You were clever, we are done. On 3, he said, because 3 is the number even defiant ideas agree is fair. 1, Shion breathed, and he. Our barrier drew in around the core until it squeezed like a hug given by a small woman with big truths. 2, Tenten said, and her anchors hummed. Silk tensed, the frame of the world held still on purpose. 3, Hinata whispered, palm touching the seam, a prayer not for gods but for edges. Karen's chains flashed, red like iron under sunset, and locked. Temari dropped wind like a hammer. Naruto drew his fingers together and let purple line itself thin and surgical and very, very polite. He cut a thread he had felt since the sanctum, the spinal line between core and count. He did not break a thing. He separated it from its after. The way you lift a child off a step and set them down 1 step later, gently, telling them what the ground feels like. The core shuddered. Then it forgot how to be an answer. Light fell out of it without drama, like flour from a bad bag. It slumped from core into mineral, something that would hum in a museum but not make the room arrange itself to please it. He desert inhaled a breath it had been holding since something arrogant fell out of the sky a long time ago. The red slice thinned to paper, then hair, then stubborn idea, then not. Tenten sagged, weeping and laughing on the same breath. You beautiful, stupid, perfect thing, she told the dead not engine. You will be a doorstop in a school. Karen sat down like her bones had waited to get the memo. Temari leaned on her fan and refused to admit to tears. Shion closed her eyes and prayed for nothing, which is the holiest thing she knew how to do. Hinata let her fingers slip off the seam and turned her palm to Naruto. He placed his there, exactly, and the world was straightforward for a second. Satsuki and Kaisei arrived like regrets that had decided to be useful. Satsuki watched the core be Lesson smiled in a way that wasn't kind and wasn't cruel. You ruined the experiment, she said, not unhappy. Write a nicer one, Naruto said. She surprised herself by bowing properly. Terms, she said. You stop cutting people into pieces you can count, Temari said. You stop building rooms that only like themselves, Tenten said. You give me your entire index of charms, Karen said. You return villagers to their villages. Shion said. You try ramen, Naruto said. Kaisei blinked. Is that a serious condition? Extremely, Naruto said. Satsuki's mouth tilted. Ramen, bells, wind, He glanced back at the stretch of desert where Annette had been and then at the city, which had decided to trust itself again in small ways like late-night tea and children being allowed to nap without being timed. I can recommend to my board that we suspend the lattice and turn our attention to study. Her eyes cut to Naruto and she had never looked more like a dangerous person behaving. I will recommend that we not engage your domain without adult supervision. Get real adults, Temari said dryly. Not men with rulers. Ramen, Kaisei said again, deeply suspicious of noodles. Make the broth correctly and the rest forgives itself, Naruto told him gravely. Is that how you treat victory? Satsuki asked, curious. Naruto looked at his team and the cliff and the slumped knot core and the red Sliver's absence and Gojo's absent smile and the quiet in his own head. I treat it like something that rots if you don't feed it humility. Satsuki bowed again. Then, until the next measurement. She caught herself. Conversation. She amended. I meant conversation. Progress, Tenten said. Karen, Naruto murmured, but it's hard to hide grins in the dark and she refused to try. They walked back late, the heat finally done proving a point. Suna allowed them in without pretending it had reservations. The council did not meet them, the city did. Vendors pushed skewers on them they didn't want and fruit slices they did. Children stared. Old men made jokes that weren't funny and were perfect. Temari's men did the straight-shouldered slump of soldiers who got to extend their lives into another morning. On the way to the inn, Hinata hooked her little finger in Naruto's sleeve, an old code for I have a small thing I need you to hear. He slowed. Tenten peeled away with Temari to bully a SMI. Into fixing an anchor cap at midnight, which is a thing smiths love if you buy them sesame sweets. Karen vanished on an errand that involved scaring a clerk into doing inventory. Shion made a slow circuit of the ward and found she did not need to tell any door to lock itself tonight. Naruto and Hinata ended up on a veranda with cheap lanterns and a view of an alley where two cats were conducting diplomacy. The air smelled like cumin, stone, and the kind of water that remembers you if you respect it. She sat first. He sat after, giving her the 2 inches of quiet she preferred when she was going to say something honest. You drop your shield on purpose, she said, not accusing, not impressed. You do it to make rooms tell the truth. You also do it because you like winning ugly if ugly keeps people. He huffed. Taste is hard. Quote, it's easier with 2, she said. He turned and met her eyes and regretted how long it had taken him to earn that sentence. I keep choosing the hard thing that saves the most, he said. Not heroic out loud in the way you get when you finally stop trying to sound like a speech. I want you there when I do. Not to decorate it. To make it fit in the world better than I can alone. Hinata smiled, the kind that connects a dot from 3 seasons ago to now. Yes, she said, and when I tell you to stop being stupid, you'll stop, or I'll make better stupid for you. He laughed. It came out like relief wrapped in pride. Deal. She bumped his shoulder with hers. He tried not to make that a clause. He failed. Temari returned at some point with a dry throat, and subtle satisfaction shining off her like well-oiled leather. She stood with her back to the rail and smirked. Tomorrow the council grovels in policy, she said. Tonight I will plan new evacuations that assume you are not in the city. And we will do fine anyway. Good, Naruto said. You and I are not done, she added, with the air of a woman who had discovered a favorite argument, not a crush. Gods forbid, he said. Karen came up the steps eating something illegal and excellent. The infirmary records are a heresy, she said, and sat cross-legged with the sprawling grace of people who have not yet admitted their fatigue. She enjoyed carrying 2 cups that steamed and one that didn't. She handed the not steaming one to Naruto with priestess disapproval of his sleep schedule. He blinked at all of them and felt the kind of heaviness you get when you've carried a very important object over one more ridge than you had planned and set it down unbroken. Gojo took the chair back near the door and sat exactly like a teacher grading papers not his students had turned in. He didn't clap. He flicked one finger like a punctuation mark at the end of a good line. "You're dangerous," he said, and for once it sounded like blessing, not warning. He tipped his head toward Hinata and Tamari and Tenten and Karen and Shion and the street and every named thing that had walked through Naruto's domain without being harmed by clarity. "For the right reasons." Naruto snorted. "You're still a jerk." "Professionally," Gojo said cheerfully, and left before anyone noticed how much affection had leaked into the curve of his mouth. The night softened properly. The red slice did not return. The stars, done with being annotated, let themselves be obvious for once. Naruto set the blindfold on the raw illing and forgot it there because he didn't need it to make choices anymore. He could choose them with people instead. Somewhere, far enough away that only very arrogant men would pretend to hear it. Amatsu counted the loss and smiled as if anticipation were a kind of worship. Satsuki dreamed of bells that refused to be silent and woke with a hangover called integrity. Kaisei ate ramen and had to admit, if only in footnotes, that there were ways the world improved when it refused to fit on a ledger. Suna slept. The desert, for once, did not hum. And on a veranda with cheap lanterns in a city he had learned a new mathematical definition for mercy. A boy who had stopped trying to be everywhere leaned into the company of people who made elsewhere matter, and felt, without numbers, what it meant to be enough. Chapter 5 End.